Good morning. It's a beautiful day in the neighborhood. Master of Ceremony, Dr. Noel Gordon, invited guests, ladies and gentlemen, a pleasant good morning to you. My name is Dr. Carrie Demetrius. I'm the co-chair of JD10 Early Childhood Task Force and co-chair of the Jamaica Diaspora Virtual Education Summer Conference 2022. It is my distinct pleasure to welcome you to the 2022 Jamaica Diaspora Virtual Education Conference. First, let me extend a warm welcome to all our special invited guests and supporters of this conference. Namely, Mr. Leo Gillen, Chairman, Jamaica Diaspora Task Force, Action Network, Mrs. Maureen C. Dwyer, Acting Permanent Secretary, the Ministry of Education and Youth, Mrs. Winnie Berry, National College for Educational Leadership, NCEL, Mr. Winston R. Smith, President, Jamaica Teachers Association, Dr. Diana Davis Smith, President, Catholic College of Mandeville, Dr. Donna Powell Wilson, JP, Executive Director, Council of Community Colleges of Jamaica, and Mrs. Carlene DeGrassis Deslantes, Executive Director, Early Childhood Commission. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for your continued support. This two-day conference promises to provide you with the support needed to push forward as you build a world-class education system for Jamaican children. As we build, we encourage you to build resilient learning communities of students. We want to encourage you to address some of your inclusive practices. And as you do that, build capacity for your educators and leaders. And at the same time, support equity for all. Throughout these 2 days, I challenge you to be that good teacher who is like a candle, lighting the way for others. Thank you and welcome again. As we get into our, this morning's program, we're going to begin with our invocation from Mrs. Elaine Foster Allen. She's a former permanent secretary in the Ministry of Education and Youth. Mrs. Allen.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning from Jamaica. We may be in different timelines. Thank you so very much for your kind invitation to lead this invocation. Would you mind if I just cut my camera and then speak with you? In Joshua chapter 1, verse 6, 7, 8, 9, and I think 13, there are 4 or so words that are repeated in interesting ways. In verse 6, it says, be strong and be of good courage. In verse 7, it says, only be thou strong and very courageous. In verse 9, it says, be strong and of a good courage. Be not afraid, neither be thou dismayed. In verse 18 or 13, it says, only be strong and of a good courage. Now, as I read through the passage, I was taken by the ways, the many times in which those words were repeated. 4 times, be strong, thrice, be of good courage, once, very courageous, and once, be not afraid, neither be thou dismayed. This morning, I want to encourage you to demonstrate the strength in your thoughts, your analyses, and your conclusions, because some of the ways in which you're being asked to lead in education at this time might very well require that you go against traditions, expectations, and against the way things are set to benefit some and not others. Indeed, you may, if you want to read that portion of scripture, you will see that Joshua was being asked to take over territories that didn't belong to him, didn't belong to the people of Israel, but he was nevertheless expected to take those spaces, whether you're thinking about landmass, whether you're thinking about an education system here in Jamaica or elsewhere, these spaces might be new to you, but you're being asked this morning, in whatever you do, to be strong, be bold, and do what is expected of you. The strength of your decisions will be tested when you come to apply and implement them. This will require courage, as I said, and in some cases, you will be required to be very courageous. Indeed, the times that we are in require you to be very courageous. All the talks and presentations over the next few days, excellent though they may be, will only be appreciated when you take action of the sort that will disrupt systems and policies that keep our children from accessing education in a manner that speaks of equity. I therefore pray this morning that the Lord will give you strength. The Lord will encourage your hearts. I pray that you will not be paralyzed by fear, but that you will possess the hope that it comes from God. I pray that you will not be distracted. I pray that you will walk in the promises of God. I pray that you will take charge and speak boldly, and that you will act justly and appropriate the direction that God has laid out for you. Be blessed in this conference. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Elaine Foster Allen, for encouraging us to be courageous. Our next activity will be our icebreaker. And do we need courage for this one? So at this time, I invite Andrea Thomas, who is the co-chair of the Summer Virtual Conference, to lead us in our icebreaker activity.
Good morning, everyone. You're going to need your iPhones and your Androids for this one, so get them out. And each question is going to be about 10 seconds, so it's going to go fast. I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to give you a code, and you're going to jump on the, hold on. Give me one moment. I got to open my screen first. Ha, 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 ha. All right, here we go. Here we go. All right. I'm going to share my screen. Hope everyone can see my screen. And you're going to go to www.kahoots.it. And you're going to put in a game pin, and I'm going to wait for you guys, the names to pop up on my screen so I can start the game. You have 5 to 7 seconds. Here we go. All right. Excellent. Come on, educators, let's move a little faster. All right, I'm going to start the game in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Our winner will get a prize from Mr. Gilling, and he will announce the prize at the end of the game. Okay, here we go. What was the first capital of this capital city of Jamaica? Very good, very good. All right, it is Sevilla La Nueva. All right, Albert, great job. You're in the lead. Next question. In what year was the first commercial flight into Jamaica? All right, time's up. It is 1930. One person got that right. Very good, very good. All right, here we go. All right, Wendy, great job. True or false? Jamaica is the largest English-speaking island in the Caribbean. And it is true. Very good. Let's see who's in the lead now. Wendy, you are on fire. Very good. All right. What does the word Zaimaka mean? Zaimaka mean? Four seconds. Very good. Got some smart people on here. Land of Wood and Water is the correct answer. And let's see who's in the lead now. Wendy, you are on fire, girl. I want to hire you as my teacher. All right, next question. In which parish is the Santa Cruz range of mountains? Very good. St. Elizabeth is the correct answer. And let's see who's in the lead now. Man, Wendy, you are hot, hot, hot. All right, here we go. What is the main agricultural crop of St. Mary? Very good. Wow. Awesome. Man, Wendy, you are bright. All right, here we go. True or false? Norman Manley and Alexander Bustamante are cousins. The answer is true. All right, Wendy, you lost your spot, but that's all right. You have four more questions to go. Here we go. In which parish are the National Archives located? St. Catherine is the right answer. All right, Wendy, you gained your spot back. All right, here we go. What is the name of the estate where Sam Sharp started rebellion he led? Very good. All right. Oh, y'all knew that one. That was spot on. Very good. All right, Wendy, holding on to that number one spot. Last question. Here we go. Who is the only musician to hold the Order of Merit in Jamaica? Jimmy Cliff is the correct answer. Thank you for playing. And our winner is Wendy. Our second place is DDS. And wait, hold on. Sorry. Our first place is Albert. Yay. Very good. Very good. Our runners up are King and Angel. Great job, you guys. Great job. I hope you enjoyed that.
Okay, so I need to announce the prize, and I don't know what the prize is. I don't remember. Help me here. Well, it was telephone.
Right.
Right. So only one winner.
No, we have three winners.
Three winners.
Albert, DDS, and Wendy.
So it's 50, 25, 25.
Yes.
So $50 of $50 of telephone credit, 25, and then 25 again.
Right.
Okay. All right. Great. So
how do they claim their prize, Mr. Gillen?
Just they have my telephone number. Just send it to me, and I'll
Excellent. I really hope you enjoyed that icebreaker. I tried to make it as difficult as possible, and I tried to make the questions that get your juices flowing in the morning. You all know that a nice quiz in the morning will get those brains going, and that's what you have to do for your students, to stimulate them to think. Have a wonderful conference. Enjoy your day.
That was great.
Thank you, Andrea, and thank you, Leah, for providing those prizes. Well, I did see the cards that started to flow this morning, and those who participated in that icebreaker activity. Now it's time for greetings. I will be announcing those individuals who will be bringing greetings this morning. Please follow in the order in which you are identified. And we'll begin first with Mr. Leo Gillen, who is the chairman of JD10, which is Jamaica Diaspora Task Force Action Network, followed by Mrs. Carlene DeGrassi Desplantis, Executive Director for the Early Childhood Commission. Next, we will have Dr. Diana Davis Smith, President of the Catholic College of Mandeville. Number 4 will be Dr. Donna Powell Wilson, JP, Executive Director of the Council of Community Colleges of Jamaica. Number 5 will be Mr. Winston R. Smith, President, Jamaica Teachers Association. And the 6th person will be Mrs. Winnie Berry, National College for Educational Leadership, followed by Mrs. Maureen C. Dwyer, Acting Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Education and Youth. So we'll begin first with Mr. Leo Gill.
Well, good morning to everybody. Thank you so much for joining this summit. We call it conference. I want to welcome everyone. It is great that we're here. I want to also acknowledge Mr. I thought I saw him here, Mr. Did I see his name here? No, it's not. Okay. Our guest speaker, Mr. Michael Salmon. I thought I saw Michael here. Oh, you are. Okay. Morning to you. And for everyone on the chat, on the Zoom here, thank you so much for joining us here at JD10. And for all the educators and teachers who are out there listening and watching, welcome. We had around about 80 educators in New York earlier this year, face-to-face, our first face-to-face event. And we figured that this event will give the persons who were not able to come to New York, give them a chance to meet and greet with some of our educators in the diaspora. So thank you so much for being here. The pandemic has changed our lives, and you know, and I've seen how the team here has worked very, very hard to get this thing going. But if we were not, if it weren't for pandemic, we would have been trying to get another face-to-face event, which can be a bit costly sometimes. So thank you, Dr. Gordon, Dr. Noel Gordon. Thank you, Dr. Sherry and Demetrius, and also Andrea Thomas for all your hard work in putting this thing together. I know it was tough, and I see all of the work that went inside. I thank you so much for this. As I said, pandemic has made it tough for us. But we at JDTAN, we prepared for it. From 2014, we've been taking our teachers from Jamaica down to California to learn how to use tablets, to use devices to teach in classroom. We were prepared when in 2019 we started online PDs, professional development workshops. We were very, very prepared and helping our teachers be prepared. And I remember the first time when we had our first online, we had 50 teachers. The second one was 100. Through pandemic, we were having 8,000, 15,000, 20,000 teachers. And we're so happy to have been ahead of the game, to be able to teach some of our institutions how to be online, to be able to teach some of our teachers who could not sign up and sign on and use their devices to teach. We were at the forefront. So I'm very, very happy that we were there to assist. I wanted in 2021, we identified a gap in our deliveries. We realized that we only had one education task force. And so in order to deliver more strategic developments for Jamaica, we had to split the one task force into 5. Now we have 5 education task force. And I go down the line. The first one is an early childhood task force led by Dr. Sharian Demetrius and also Miss Melanie Baker. The second one is a primary and secondary task force led by Dr. Noel Gordon. The third, the tertiary task force led by Dr. Sharika Dakers. And we have the special education task force led by Dr. Claudette Peterkin. And interestingly, we have Miss Andrea Thomas here. And Andrea, I really wanted to meet with Mrs. Winnie Berry, because she's with the NEI, and you would need to get in touch with her. We also have our technology team in Miss Antoinette Brown and Tanisha Kerr. I'm very, very happy to have this team who has gone together, put this whole summit together for us to be able to take advantage of it. This summit is as important as we are. We're able to bring it, to open up the conferences to everybody, to all the teachers, all the educators. I just want to say welcome everyone, and thank you for being here. I hope that the next 2 days will bring you great content. Well, I shouldn't hope. I know that the next 2 days will bring you great content, and because we are here to make some great deliveries. I welcome everyone and everybody across Jamaica and across the world. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Gilling. Just to remind our speakers, you have 3 minutes in which to do your bring greetings. I'm going to do a quick switch, and I'm going to ask Ms. Maureen Dwyer to go next. She's the acting permanent secretary in the Ministry of Education and Youth. Thank you.
please unmute Mrs. Dwyer, please unmute. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, moderator. Good morning, everyone. I recognize Dr. Noel Gordon. He's the chairman of the conference. Mr. Leo Gilling, the chairman of the Jamaica Diaspora Task Force Action Network, JDTAN. Mrs. Winnie Berry, our director principal of NCEL. Leslie Ann Samuels, I cannot leave out Leslie Ann Samuels in absentia. I'm not seeing her online, but please convey my greetings to her. Carlene Largy, Mr. Winston Smith, President of Jamaica Teachers Association, Dean Michael Salmon, Assistant Vice President and Dean of Academic Excellence at Marymount Manhattan College, and today's keynote speaker, Mrs. Carlene DeGrasse Deslandis, our Executive Director of our own Early Childhood Commission. Mrs. Elaine Foster Allen, thank you for your prayers, ma'am. They really touched me at a good place this morning. Thank you. Mrs. Diana Davis Smith, President of the Catholic College of Mandeville. Dr. Donna Powell Wilson, Executive Director of the Council of Community Colleges of Jamaica. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished ladies and gentlemen online and in the diaspora as well as in Jamaica, good morning. I want to really thank you for having me this morning. I'm delighted to bring greetings on behalf of the Ministry of Education and Youth at this very worthwhile Jamaica Diaspora Education Task Force Virtual Education Summer Conference. We acknowledge with appreciation, with much appreciation, the strong support of the Jamaican diaspora community to the education sector over the many, many years, and really look forward to the Task Force Action Network continuing to be partners with us in providing the resources and the right environment to give our children an opportunity to excel in their academic as well as their personal development pursuits. In reflecting on your theme, pushing forward, resilience, inclusion, capacity, equity, we should also reflect on the ways in which we can adapt and implement good and best practices in education. So as Jamaica continues the efforts to recover from the worst effects of the COVID-19 pandemic, we reinforce the point that action must be determined by and based in sound data and empirical evidence. We do know from a number of studies locally and elsewhere that widespread crises tend to exacerbate inequities and inequalities of all kinds, and COVID-19 has been no exception. The most vulnerable have been disproportionately affected by this pandemic, including our children, in particular, those from the lower socioeconomic backgrounds and those with special needs. To ensure that we mitigate the incidence of this happening, special measures were taken to identify and support the most vulnerable in our education system. And so at this point, you may ask, what have we done? So here in Jamaica, the Ministry of Education and Youth implemented a strategy that we call Recover Smarter, National School Learning and Intervention Plan, the NSLIP, to address the most immediate needs of our students and the system at this time. It was built on 3 pillars that I wish to share with you this morning. Number 1 was academic learning and holistic development. This pillar was focused on students' cognitive development as described in our national standards curriculum. Students should benefit from spiritual development, psychosocial support, character education, and physical education and development. Critical to this pillar is ensuring that students access the learning opportunities that will endure from the development of the whole child. The second pillar related to capacity building. And of course, I must pause here to recognize that this two-day conference is about capacity building. And so this pillar is designed to ensure that critical collaborative groups are empowered to play their role in the development and implementation of the reopening plan, to take responsibility of the required change in mindset and in function, and to function collaboratively in developmentally appropriate ways. So capacity building opportunities are being created for parents, for school leaders, for community groups, and for our teachers, so that curriculum implementation teams and classroom teachers are able to engage in ways with material and with our students that will help the rebuilding process. And the third pillar focuses around community and parent engagement. And I don't need to stress the importance in our space of community and parent engagement. So we have our National Parenting Support Commission that is engaged with all those entities on the ground that are relating to parents and parental development and parental learning at this time. It is focused on creating and sustaining the required collaborative and inclusive environments by connecting all the relevant stakeholders. So it's a comprehensive approach that involves programs, policies, facilities, and initiatives that are required to meet the whole range of needs for parents and the community to support our students' learning. So you may also ask, why are we doing all of this? All of this is being done in recognition of the imperative of the challenge of preparing Jamaican students, not just for our local economy, but for a global marketplace in which everything and almost everyone is interconnected. In one sense, we're having to prepare our children for the contemporary marketplace amid global demands that are also constantly changing. So even as we speak, the ground is changing under our feet. So that challenges us to focus on pedagogical practices that will make teaching effective. For example, how do we teach our children to work collaboratively? So we know it's a buzzword, but how do we do that? On what would normally be practical, hands-on sessions in our class, we now have to move online. How do we teach collaborative learning online? These are some of the challenges that we now face because now we're miles apart. Some of us are face-to-face, but some of us, we're miles apart. How do we then bring our children into collaborative learning in this kind of space? You know, I pause here to say that last night I was watching television only to see an ad about a regional school for CXC. And I thought to myself, here we go. This is the future. This is where we are. That challenges our teachers. That challenges the quality of our pedagogies. So the future is here. How do we do this? So even as we take steps to make instrumental technologies more accessible to students and home spaces and to increase digital literacy, we are being challenged to make remote learning more relatable and more student-centered. We do know the dangers of the one-size-fits-all approach to teaching in a world of rapidly changing technological and culturally diverse and long-standing social and economic disparities. We all have to seek to employ best practices that are suited to our situation in Jamaica, and yet we'll still prepare our students for a contemporary global community. The fact is, We are being challenged to rethink education in a way that enables all people to deal with this rapidly changing environment in both their work and social lives. Everyday acts of doing business now require some interaction with ICT. And to prepare our children to fit seamlessly in this new and evolving normal, we have to start at a very early age. Mrs. D. So teacher training colleges have already amended their training programs to enable training teachers to be ready for new classrooms, which in many cases will incorporate the use of information and communication technologies. So we have much work to do, but our programs and plans are being implemented cognizant of this reality. We can and are preparing our children with the skills needed for our times. And so I trust that as we work collaboratively with you in the diaspora and share experiences and data on how to push education forward, we do so with an appreciation of the challenges, opportunities, and steps that were already being implemented, but which may need some adjustments. So I thank you for your continued interest. You, the team, JTDAN, all the persons in the diaspora who continue to be there for us. We thank you, we welcome you, and every input that you make in the system is well appreciated. So I wish for you a successful conference. Thanks again, and have a good morning.
Thank you so much. We'll move on to our next person, who is Ms. Carleen DeGrassis Desplantis, Executive Director for the Early Child Commission. Good morning again, Ms. Desplantis.
Good morning, moderator. Good morning, everyone. Moderator, Dr. Sherry-Ann Demetrius, Mr. Leo Gilling, Chairman, Jamaica Diaspora Task Force Action Network, JD TAN, Dr. Noel Gordon, Conference Chair, Mrs. Maureen Dwyer, Permanent Secretary, Acting Ministry of Education and Youth, Dr. Diane Davis Smith, President, Catholic College of Mandeville, Dr. Donna Powell Wilson, JP, Executive Director, Council of Community Colleges of Jamaica, Mrs. Winnie Berry, Director Principal, National College for Educational Leadership, Mr. Winston Smith, President, Jamaica Teachers Association, Mrs. Elaine Foster Allen. Thank you for praying so wonderfully for us this morning. Partners and sponsors of the event, members of the Jamaica Diaspora Task Force Action Network. Good morning. It is my absolute pleasure to be invited to this virtual education summer conference hosted by JD TAN. On behalf of the Early Childhood Commission, I send you my warmest greetings and best wishes. When I heard this year's theme, pushing forward, resilience, inclusion, capacity, and equity, I thought this is precisely what we need as an education sector. The early childhood sector has been one of the areas hardest hit by the COVID-19 pandemic. In the past 2 years, we have seen numerous articles and reports on how the pandemic has drastically affected our sector, and we have seen and lived through it for ourselves. As we continue to push forward, it may not always be the easiest, but being resilient is bringing us through. As ECC celebrates the year of early childhood development, we push forward and continue to push forward our mission to advance education in achieving our national goal for Vision 2030. By the end of this conference, I am confident that greater knowledge and insight will be gained by all. Participants, I hope you will feel motivated and be inspired leaders, equipped to make the necessary changes that will positively impact our children, classroom, and communities. Ensure that you pay keen attention to the presentation. We are counting on your participation in the discussions. I take this opportunity to commend JD TAN, the Jamaica Diaspora Task Force Action Network, for the excellent work they have done over the years and their continuous efforts to foster growth within the education sector. As we go into the conference, keep in mind that the information given today will impact us and the children and families that need our support. The children are the future of every country, so we must be resilient in our efforts to push forward. Welcome everyone and have a productive and enjoyable conference.
Thank you so much, Ms. Lantis. Next, as we push forward, we're going to hear from Dr. Diana Davis-Smith, President of the Catholic College of Mandeville.
Good morning, and thank you so much. Conference co-chairs, J.D. Tan Chair, Mr. Gillen, Acting Permanent Secretary, Mrs. Doan, former Permanent Secretary, Mrs. Foster Allen, Keynote Speaker, NCEL Exec Director, President JTA, and should I perhaps say the next 14-day president, JTA, my colleague, Dr. Donna Powell-Wilson. It is Mrs. Deslandis, my partner at the Early Childhood Commission, colleagues, friends, educators, students, all present, good morning. As we reflect on the conference theme, pushing forward, resilience, inclusion, capacity, equity, spelling rice, we've come together to put together a Jamaican meal that we all can identify with, rice and peas. So the rice has been outlined here, and together we, the people, will be the peas. We're tasked to come prepared for collective action in one direction, pushing forward. One direction that is socially just, joining forces for greater service. CCM has long cemented an empowering relationship with JD Tan, and today as partner, we commend the Education Task Force on the promotion of quality global learning. Now, the JTC bill, for those who are familiar here in Jamaica, has highlighted the need for professional development sessions such as these to build capacity of educators, ensuring equity in an inclusive fashion to ensure the resilience of Jamaican educators. So the theme rests well with me. I want to wish our speakers, our panelists, and all attendees a most productive conference. Thank you so much.
Thank you too. You're making me feel hungry right now for that rice and peas. So thank you so much, Dr. Diana Davis-Smith. And now I invite Dr. Donna Powell-Wilson to share.
Thank you, Madam Chairperson. Good morning, everyone. Kindly allow me to adopt the protocols already established. On behalf of the Chairman of Council, Dr. Orville Beckford, Council members, and the Secretariat staff, it is indeed an honor to greet you all at this virtual Education Summer Conference. The CCCJ is indeed grateful for the opportunity to partner with the Jamaica Diaspora Task Force Action Network in hosting this event. This partnership, the CCCJ values, and it is in keeping with our quest to contribute meaningfully to the Sustainable Development Goals, specifically number 17, Partnership for the Goals, and our own Vision 2030. For sustainable development, partnerships seek to engage initiatives of multi-stakeholders whose efforts will contribute to the implementation of the government's developed goals and commitments. For us in Jamaica, access to quality education is a common goal we share. Congratulations to JD Tan for recognizing the value of partnerships and seeing them as an important vehicle for mobilizing and sharing knowledge, expertise, and technological resources to support the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals of our country, Jamaica. The CCCJ certainly looks forward to the continued opportunities in which our member institutions and learners can benefit from your wealth of experience and resource sharing. Education continues to be the engine that drives our country and by extension, the world. Therefore, it is indicative that educators remain focused, pushing forward with RISE, resilience, inclusion, capacity, and equity. Let us break the silos and take a more holistic approach to education by embracing sustainability. This conference promises to do just that. Again, congratulations to JD Tan for hosting this conference. The CCCJ wishes for everyone a successful event. Thank you.
And thank you so much for bringing those words of encouragement. I now invite Mr. Winston R. Smith, President of the Jamaica Teachers Association, to bring greetings.
Thank you, Dr. Demetrius. And like my colleague before, please allow me to stand on the protocol already established. But in the meantime, permit me still to say a special shout out to the great Leo Gilliams, and also to my permanent secretary, Mrs. Maureen Dwyer. And if I may share a little story before I bring my greetings. As a young boy, you know, just left college, fresh out of college into teaching. I was teaching at Papine High School, and I heard that the education officer was coming and all my colleagues were in a quandary. Of course, you know, I got very nervous too. I was there teaching and hoping and praying simultaneously that she didn't come to my class. And Dr. Demetrius, would you believe that the EO come and take up residence in my class? I was a nervous wreck. But after finishing my lesson, I was teaching on a physics component of the integrated science. She came over to me and she patted me on the shoulder and told me it was a beautiful lesson. That commendation transformed my teaching life beyond measure. I never forget her for it, never, because it meant a lot. And it is in that breath now, colleagues, good morning, as I greet you again and salute you all, Dr. Gardner, and see you looking on. The opportunity presented here is one that we can never pay if we were to pay money together. It is one that provides us as educators with an opportunity to advance our knowledge, our skills, our expertise in this venture called educating our nation, national capacity building, strengthening the resolve and the resilience of our people. When we look at it, the theme, RISE, you know, it brings me back to the point that people, it is said now that we must be very careful of the things we eat to minimize lifestyle disease. But this is one RISE that will not cause any health condition. What it will do is stimulate the mind, uplift the brain, and improve the capacity of our people. This RISE does not need peas. What it needs is the willingness to learn, to upskill, and to advance oneself. The Jamaica Education Diaspora Action Network has been partnering with the Jamaica Teachers Association from its inception for many years. And we are very grateful for the opportunities. I hear Leo speak to the fact that we were doing training with tablets. I was a part of the first cohort, and it served us well, especially in the pandemic. Our educators were able to pivot and to embrace the technology to advance education during a difficult time in our country. Had it not been for that exposure, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, our teachers would be in a would have it more challenging to operate in this pandemic. But because of the visionary attitude, mindset, and thought of our colleagues and friends in the diaspora, we were ahead of the game. And as such, we were able to participate effectively in ensuring that education continue in Jamaica. We sometimes look at the diaspora and talk about migration being a brain drain. I've said it on numerous occasions. This door doesn't swing in one direction. It swings back and forth. It creates opportunity for our teachers to go and upskill, and it provides a conduit for you, our colleagues in the diaspora, who would have benefited from Jamaica in the early days, have gone ahead, advancing yourselves to come back and to share your knowledge and your resources with us, who are trying our best to make sure that this generation and beyond benefit from quality education. We salute you. We appreciate you, ladies and gentlemen. Your work can never be understated. And when I look at the enthusiasm, the dynamism, the commitment that the diaspora has for Jamaica, I feel a sense of hope, a sense of belonging, recognizing that together we are all in this business. I look at the participants and those who are online today. It represents the wide gamut of the education hierarchy in Jamaica. The Ministry of Education is here. The Early Childhood Commission, the special educators are here. The National College of Educational Leadership is here. And we are all in this together. It brings a sense of hope, emanating from having celebrated 60 years as an independent nation. When we look at what transpired over the weekend and look at what is happening now, I can truly say that Jamaica is in a good space. It's on a good path. And we're hoping that our colleagues who are on the chat will avail themselves to all the knowledge, the skills, abilities, the resources, the methodologies that will be displayed and shared during this conference. It is one we could never pay for. And therefore, ladies and gentlemen, your philanthropic attitude is one that must be applauded. I'm hoping, Leo and colleagues, that in time to come, the Jamaican government will recognize in a meaningful way the conceptualizers of this education task force and to accord on the founding members some national honor, because truly it is in the best interest of our nation that you work. And the most important thing is you're doing it for free. Many of our poor Jamaican children, many of our poor teachers would never be able to afford this kind of training should they be required to pay for it. The opportunity to travel to California, to Florida, to New York, to learn, to share, to see what is happening on a wider scale and to bring back innovative ideas to Jamaica is one that is priceless from the point of view of the Jamaica Teachers Association and its members. Colleagues, we salute you. We pray that God will continue to give you the mind, the strength, the desire, and most importantly, the passion to ensure that Jamaica continue to advance. We say in our motto that we will advance the nation. You are doing just that. Let us continue as we unite and serve, because I want to dub you all honorary members of the JTA. I wish I had the authority, but of course, conference is the one who has that. But had it been mine to give, I would have dubbed you all honorary members or life members of the Jamaica Teachers Association. Because when we are among you, we feel like royalty. You have treated us well, you continue to treat us well. And the teachers of Jamaica salute you, we appreciate you. We say kudos. Thank you for all that you are doing, all that you have done, and all that you will do. May God richly bless you all, colleagues. And may He continue to bless you abundantly, that you can share with us both your financial and resource, so that we together can champion the cause of education and the minds of our children in this beautiful island called Jamaica. Thank you very much, and we look forward to a very successful conference.
Thank you so much for those encouraging words. I think members of JD Tan are truly blessed to share with you the knowledge that we have gained over the year. And we know that whatever we do benefits our country, our homeland, Jamaica. Our final greeting will come from Mrs. Winnie Berry from the National College for Educational Leadership. Ms. Berry.
Thank you. Mr. Leo Gillen, Chairman, Jamaica Diaspora Task Force Action Network. Mrs. Maureen Dwyer, or Permanent Secretary Acting of the Ministry of Education and Youth. Mr. Winston R. Smith, President of the Jamaica Teachers Association, 14 beautiful days left. Mrs. Carleen DeGrasse Desolandes, colleague, Executive Director of the Early Childhood Commission. Dr. Diana Davis Smith, President of the Catholic College of Mandeville. Dr. Donna Powell Wilson, JP, and Executive Director, the Council of Community Colleges of Jamaica. Mrs. Elaine Foster Allen, the chosen, for standing in the breach for us today. Ladies and gentlemen, all, good morning. I greet you well, colleagues and friends, as we meet again, this time for your Jamaica Diaspora Education Task Force Virtual Education Summer Conference. You've done it again. The National College for Educational Leadership trusts you are well and wishes to thank you for your continued commitment to leadership and the operationalization of the targets for education. Today we speak of RISE, or goals for resilience, inclusion, capacity building, and equity. It is particularly wonderful that we should be able to really meet like this as we continue to celebrate our achievements as an independent nation over these past 60 years. We can say that notwithstanding the challenges, there has been significant progress and transformation in the education sector, allowing for greater access to more students and a reform of the national curriculum to be responsive to contemporary, local, and global demands. In this national project of educating our people, the Jamaica Diaspora in North America, the United Kingdom, and other countries have played a significant part by way of mobilizing support for schools and the funding for scholarships. And we would have heard, or JT, our president, a while ago, we cannot say thanks enough to you for what you have done and to have gathered us in one space on several occasions for the cause of education. At the same time, we must acknowledge that the education sector was severely affected by the COVID-19 pandemic, resulting in setbacks and learning loss. Against that background, I again acknowledge your theme, pushing forward, resilience, inclusion, capacity, equity. As a people, we have no option but to push forward. Continuing the progress of transformation to widen access to more programs, better training opportunity, capacity building of in-service educators and those at teachers training colleges, and to do so in a manner that ensures that irrespective of their social and economic circumstances or special needs, no child is left behind. COVID-19 showcased the classic situation of which every crisis we know, in every crisis we know there are opportunities. Many educational institutions upgraded their ICT infrastructure and departments. Teachers grabbed the opportunity to learn more about online modalities and how to better utilize the computer space. Social administrators moved to effect greater efficiency in communication and general organizational operations. Yet, even as the worst of this particular public health crisis seems to be past, we cannot become complacent. Indeed, if anything, the global environment is pushing us to adapt to our training programs to be more agile and relevant amidst the rapid changes taking place in ICT. The content of our programs, as well as the methods we employ at the college, are therefore subject to frequent assessment and reform. The college continues to offer to all our leaders in education, among others, free of cost, the following programs: the Effective Principals Training Program, free of cost; the Strategic Middle Leadership Initiative, free of cost; Leadership and School Policy, free of cost; Child-Friendly Schools, free of cost; Leadership for Safer Schools, being piloted now, free of cost; and the Aspiring Principals Program, which is the only program that comes with a cost. You may check our websites and social platforms for start dates, or you may just call the college. As educators, we are constantly being challenged to nurture equality and inclusion within our classrooms. Students enter the classrooms or online programs with an assortment of beliefs, and educators should be aware of the need to foster a sense of belonging for all our students while instilling respect for others. In addition, with an increased focus on STEAM education, there is a greater appreciation of the benefits of teaching students interdisciplinary lessons and projects. This approach incorporates the arts into the more familiar STEM model, which includes science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. STEAM programs can include any of the visual or performing arts, such as dance, design, painting, photography, and writing. This approach, however, raises another challenge: how to make sure our learners are able to thrive in this innovative, multidimensional learning environment. This calls for a range of inclusive teaching strategies in order to meet different needs of learners. So, as we seek to push forward, the how and what have we in alignment, in addition to giving consideration to the social and cultural environments in which we operate, must take center stage. These are among the things I share with you as we contemplate how we move forward. Ladies and gentlemen, I bring you greetings on behalf of the National College for Educational Leadership and look forward to hearing other perspectives and recommendations that can be applied to our local situations. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Berry. So insightful in terms of what is being offered.
The things I share with
And now,
contemplate.
they always say we move to the eating the meat and potatoes, but this time we are going to move to Dr. Noel, who will give us an overview of today's activity, followed by we'll have our guest speaker. Dr. Noel?
Hello, everyone. Pleasant good morning. The atmosphere is filled with excitement, and I'm also very excited. I'd like to just at this time to acknowledge the chairperson of JD TAN, the illustrious Mr. Gilling, and Mrs. Maureen C. Dwyer, the permanent secretary acting, the Minister of Education and Youth, Ms. Winnie Ann Marie Berry, Director Principal, acting for the National College for Educational Leadership, and to our amazing partners. Before we get to the partners, let me mention our outgoing JT president. Man, we're going to miss you, man. We're going to miss you. Just as we start building this relationship, we're going to give you some honorary status so that we keep you in the loop, all right? So after 14 days, we're going to give you that accolade, all right? And then to our amazing partners, Dr. Donna Powell Wilson, Dr. Diana Davis Smith and your organization, and also Ms. Colin Deslandis. I also like to mention the members of our planning team. Most of the members of the planning team were from Jamaica, and also those who are from the United States. Thank you so much for the great work that you put in planning this conference. Just very quickly, as you see, the theme for our conference is RICE. We were very intentional, and the acronym really, it's more than the rice and peas or the rice and mackerel and the rice and bully beef. I still remember those things. But the resilience really meaning we went through the pandemic, and we're not starting over. We are building capacity. We're not going back to the old ways. We are moving forward, making sure we infuse technology into what we are doing, into our teaching and learning. And if we move from resilience to inclusion, we want to make sure that no one is left behind, and we are focusing on information relating to special education, other special needs, and gifted and talented, etc. And we are building capacity. What the knowledge that we have now, we are building on that. And that's why we're doing these professional development initiatives. And then equity. Equity is a big thing. Equity in Jamaica might not look like equity in the United States. Here it's more racial. In Jamaica, it might be more about resources and other situations. So we will be having two forums today. 2 1-hour forums, and we have various speakers will share their perspectives, and then we'll give the audience an opportunity to weigh in. So make sure you have your questions in the chat, in the YouTube chat. Make sure you put your questions there, and we'll answer as many questions as we possibly can. And then tomorrow we have another format where we'll have 3 different sections. On the first section, we'll have 3 speakers, and each will be speaking for 10 minutes, and then we'll leave another 25, 30 minutes to engage the audience. We learned from the last survey that you did. You said you'd like to have more engagement. So we were very intentional in leaving enough time so that you can raise your questions, and the panelists will definitely share their perspectives. And with that saying, I'd like to just go on to our first speaker. Our keynote speaker, someone who we learned to appreciate, and someone who we're very proud of, a son of the soil. His institution hosted our March conference, and they did an excellent job. So at this time, we're going to be hearing from our keynote speaker for the first day, who is Dean Michael Salmon, who is the Associate Vice President / Dean of Academic Excellence and Senior Advisor to the President of Marymount Manhattan College. He advises the President and several senior leaders on various strategic initiatives and student-centered projects. He has a bachelor's and master's in economics from the University of the West Indies, my alma mater, and has completed doctoral coursework at NYU. He has over 15-year experience in teaching across a wide variety of subject areas, and his research interests include cross-country business cycle transmissions, Caribbean basin economics, and applied microtheory. He has been a director on the board of the Union of Jamaica Alumni Association, UJA, since 2019. Dean Malcolm Salmon, it's a pleasure having you. And without any further ado, we'd like to turn over the rest of this platform to you. Thank you so much.
Good morning, everybody. Hope everybody can hear me well. Dr. Gordon, thank you so very much for that very kind introduction. And I want to say happy belated independence to all my Jamaican colleagues here. Hope you had a wonderful day as we celebrated 60 years of our independence. Madam Master of Ceremony, Dr. Sherian Demetrius, and your colleagues, Ms. Adrian Thomas as co-chair. I also want to say Chairman of JD TAN, Mr. Leo Gillen, thank you so much for giving me this opportunity. The Acting Permanent Secretary, Ministry of Education and Youth, Mrs. Maureen Dwyer, thank you for the message. Acting Director Principal of the National College for Education Leadership, Mrs. Winnie Ann Marie Berry, President of the Jamaica Teachers Association, Mr. Winston Smith, Executive Director of the Council of Community Colleges in Jamaica, Dr. Donna Powell Wilson, had the opportunity to be there recently with you, President of the Catholic College of Mandeville, Dr. Diana Davis Smith, Executive Director of the Early Childhood Commission in Jamaica, Mrs. Elaine DeGrasse Deslandes. And also, thank you so much, Mrs. Elaine Foster Allen, for that very nice early invocation at the start of this program. I also would be remiss if I did not formally recognize my colleagues from UJA, Ms. Largi, as well as our President, Leslie Ann Samuels. Other distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. First, I want to say thank you to the organizers, JD TAN, for putting this conference together. In fact, I must say that if I understand this well, this is yet another opportunity for professional development for those of you, our teachers, who in some way or the other are in the business of educating our people. To all our educational leaders gathered here, as well as our teachers, I'd like to be among the first to say thank you for the work that you're doing on behalf of our students in Jamaica. But I want to remind you that if you think that the business of education is just about just education, we all have it wrong. In fact, it's a lot more. It's about the economic, social, and political transformation of our nation, our island home. Ladies and gentlemen, when I think of the business of education, it's not just about teaching and learning. Friends, the timing of this conference could not have been better as we're celebrating 60 years of independence. May I start by saying that without education, there is no nation. Without education, there is no independence to celebrate. So today, as I get into my short talk, I want to really put forward three opening propositions. One, I'm of the considered opinion that education is the solution to everything, and I emphasize everything, that ails our society, from crime and poverty to economic stagnation, low productivity, and the list goes on. It's truly the key to transforming our society. Two, but I must say that in order to transform our society through education, we must first transform education. And you've heard this already from some of the speakers, but we need to do this from top to bottom. There can be no transformation of our society without the transformation of education. Third point, how can we transform education without transforming the educators, us? In fact, I must submit to you that we have to begin with ourselves. We have to take a look at the proverbial man in the mirror. In fact, in order for us to make changes in education, we have to start with ourselves. You know, Mahatma Gandhi is alleged to have said, "Be the change you wish to see." I think we need to start with ourselves. Mr. Chairman, much has been made of rice so far. And of course, being Jamaican, rice is always a part of my diet, especially rice and peas. But as I make my presentation today, with your permission, sir, I'd like to change the order in which I make this presentation. First, I'm going to start with resilience. Then I want to go to capacity, then inclusion, and finally equity. You see, I'm doing this because, in my opinion, my humble opinion, there can be no resilience without capacity, no capacity without inclusion, no inclusion without equity. Of course, all these are intertwined and interrelated, and they're all building blocks to the transformation that we're talking about. So let me start with resilience. You see, when I was a young boy growing up in a little district in a place called Pike that many of you probably don't even know, my old primary school teachers used to say that there are 3 R's in education: reading, writing, and arithmetic. And it was clever to summarize what they thought education was all about. But today I think we need to add another R, which is resilience. You see, before I do that though, I like to start by saying, well, what exactly do we mean by that term resilience? I'm going to use a very simple definition. It's the ability to bounce back when life throws you a body blow. My teachers back then perhaps never thought I needed to know anything about this. Or if they thought it was important, they thought perhaps it didn't belong in the classroom. But my friends, after all we've been through over the last 2 years, I think if my teachers had a chance to endure that, they would all have agreed that that new R, resilience, need to be put and added to the original 3 R's. We need to add that to our practice in every way. I want to start by saying that we can no longer take the future for granted. No longer can we assume what's going to come ahead. Teaching students to build resilience should be a basic part of the curriculum of what we do. Every student needs to understand how to deal with failure and disappointment. Because when we continue to encourage, although we continue to encourage and promote academic success, we must also teach our students that the path to success is often littered with the debris of failure, and that often those who succeed are those best equipped to deal with failure. Or NBA legend Michael Jordan once said, "I've failed over and over again in my life, and that's why I succeed." I'm sure you must be asking, why is the Dean of Academic Excellence spending so much time talking about failure? It seems contradictory, right? But it's really not. You see, to understand success, we must understand failure. And in fact, it's like trying to understand light without understanding darkness. Over 120 years ago, the great African-American educator and visionary, Booker T. Washington, addressed the issue of resilience by writing, "I've learned that success is to be measured not so much by the position the one has reached in life, but by the obstacles overcome while trying to succeed." This reminds me of a story I read back when I was of a young man in Jamaica a few years ago who lost his mom and dad just before taking his CXC exams. But despite this personal tragedy, he was able to muster the strength and the resilience to pass all 10 CXC exams, and all with all ones. What a feat. You see, when many would have crumbled up and fallen apart, this young man soldiered on and succeeded with resilience. We have to teach resilience. It's really a key to success. We must share stories to our students and remind them of Washington's words. We must instill in our students the need for them to overcome obstacles. You know, I submit to you that perhaps one reason in our society for crime and violence at the level that we're seeing is that many of our young people, when faced with adversity, when faced with obstacles, they choose the easy road of crime rather than the road least traveled, the one that requires resilience. But you know, resilience makes us optimistic when others are pessimistic. It makes us feel that we can do it. And this is something we have to do, and we have to start early. You see, if 70 years in prison in South Africa by Mandela had broken his will, the story of his victory of apartheid would not have been shared. If Martin Luther King had given up the fight for racial justice after he was stabbed and almost died in 1958, his fight for civil rights would have been merely a footnote on the back pages of history. Sometimes, you know, I think of a song in Jamaica, Many Rivers to Cross by Jimmy Cliff. You probably know it well. And there's a line that Jimmy Cliff has there which says, I've been licked, washed up for years, but only survived because of my pride. Ladies and gentlemen, the idea of success in our schools and by our students has to start with resilience. It matters a lot. You see, some of you as teachers listening to my voice today, the young man in your class that failed his exam upon trying once, but with your encouragement, he tried and tried again and finally succeeded and have gone on to do great things. That may have been your contribution to reducing crime within our society. We have to teach our young people to try and not to give up. But you know, resilience goes well beyond our students. It must be woven deeply into the entire fabric of our educational system. After all, how can we teach resilience if our leaders themselves are not resilient? We must understand that success depends on how well we can stand up when we ourselves face obstacles. During the pandemic, many of us had to stop and pivot at short notice, and we did. Many of us, in fact, were not well equipped to really adapt, but we did. And in fact, as I heard earlier, lots of effort have been put in place to ensure that we can continue to adapt. It is so important. In fact, this pandemic, as we all know, have taken a great toll on us as educators, as teachers, physically as well as emotionally. But we look to the future with hope, because I believe we're now better prepared than we ever had been. You see, I want to really say that, again, resilience is something that we have to really do for our students. We have to tell them, again, to take risks. For our teachers, we must give them the opportunity to innovate, knowing that not all innovations will be successful. As administrators, we must remind ourselves that in every crisis, such as what we're going through, there lies an opportunity. In fact, when we teach ourselves about the idea of opportunity in the midst of crisis, we're training our brains to be resilient in face of adversity. When we destigmatize failure, but instead see it as a natural part of life, a natural part of learning, we're teaching ourselves and our students to be resilient. When we encourage innovation and risk-taking, we are really promoting resilience. Frankly speaking, where there are no risks, there are no reward. And I want to go, where there's no resilience, there are likely to be no success in the end. This takes me to capacity building. And when I look at capacity building as educators, you know that what we're talking about here is the ability of the institution to accomplish its mission through improvements in both human and physical capital. As I said earlier, there can be no resilience without capacity building. In fact, the two are intertwined. To make our students, our teachers, and administrators more resilient, we must invest in capacity building. You know, as my grandmother would say, though, we want to think of this as investment. You know, back in the country, we used to say you can't reap yam if you plant cocoa. So in order to do this capacity building, we have to invest in what I call 4 things. One is our people. Investment in things, investment in processes, investment in structures. Let's talk about people first. What we're doing today, thank you so much, JD Tan, is an investment in people. That's why you're hosting this conference. It's about capacity building, and we thank you for that. We have to ensure that the knowledge and the skills and the values and the motivation within our teachers continue. Because an unmotivated group of people will not deliver. It's so important. But we also need to invest in things, because tools matter. Quite often students fail, not because they're not smart, but because they do not have the kinds of tools, the computers, the labs, the facilities to succeed. When we think about, and I'll talk about that a little bit, inequities in education, sometimes a fundamental inequity is inequity about things, about who has and who does not. It's between the haves and the have-not. But here money matters. And I think we need to put our mouth where we believe. We have to say to ourselves, can we invest and should we invest in this? It is important. I remember back in the 1960s, at the start of independence, we made a realization, for example, that enough of our students were not having access. We made the realization that we needed to build more physical capacity. And my God, we did. In a very short period, as you may remember, we built lots of junior secondary schools and all that, and we expanded capacity. I want to argue that that matters a lot. You know, we always say money matters. And one of the things that I must tell you is that one of the predictors here in America of who will perform well in the SATs has a lot to do with not all the other things, but the income of the parents. What that tells us is that money matters, and those who don't have are likely not to do as well as those that do. So if we want to transform education, we have to make sure we equalize those opportunities by the investment that we do in both rich and poor communities. And in fact, especially in poor communities where the deficit is probably greatest. We should also invest in processes. I'm a great believer in processes because processes matter. Let's not reinvent the wheel when they're best practices. We know how to do some things well. We can learn from others. I've been here in the diaspora for more than almost 40 years. I've taught at NYU for over 35 years. I've been an administrator. I've learned a lot in that process. I'm so proud, for example, of the work that we do even here in our organizations in the diaspora to support the work that you're doing in Jamaica. The fact of the matter is that if I open up a process manual and it looks like it was written in 1950, I really want to throw it in the garbage. The fact of the matter is that it's not relevant to the time. And we build capacity by updating our processes. Wake up, everybody. Let me just say, process matters. Finally, investment in organizational structures. You see, having a nice building filled with, hardworking teachers committed in every classroom with a desk, computer on every desk is important, but it's not going to build capacity if we do not also make sure that our teachers feel the support of our institutional and national leaders. If they don't feel that, in fact, they're supported, if they don't feel that accountability and efficiency matter at every level, we're immediately shooting ourselves in the leg. That's really an important thing we need to do. And finally, capacity building cannot be a one-time event. Capacity building, of course, is not about today, it's about tomorrow. Many of us are great at allocating things today. We're not so good at doing it over time. I want to argue that, when we think about capacity, we're thinking about the future. Let's remind ourselves that in order for us to think of the future and do well, we need to have some vision. In Proverbs 19, it says, where there is no vision, the nation will perish. Let me put it this way. Most people that I know can get an A on hindsight. Maybe they get a B on insight, but quite often they get an F in foresight. In capacity building, foresight is in fact the most important thing here. Looking back won't help us that much. It's looking forward that really matters. So again, let's commit ourselves or recommit ourselves to investment in our people, in the things that they need, in the processes and the structure. Anything short of this is merely just empty words on a page. Turning my attention to inclusion, I want to say there are two levels in which I'd like to think of inclusion. First, in the classroom, and next, in the institution. You see, meaningful institutional capacity building needs to pay attention to inclusion. After all, the process of building capacity needs to begin with having the right people at the table. Much too often we fail right at the start by not having good representation of all stakeholders in the room. Of course, this is a rookie mistake because people who are excluded will have no motivation to see the plan succeed. In addition, by excluding some voices, we commit another unforced error that may cost us dearly later on. Back in the 1980s, when I was teaching at the University of the West Indies, I remember hearing a story about a place that built a facility. And later, only when it was complete, they realized they hadn't put bathrooms in. What a really silly thing. But you know why that happened? Perhaps because they didn't take the perspectives of the workers, the perspective of those who were going to use the building. I had a similar experience here in New York many years ago in an institution where they'd open up a new student services center. And it was nice and shiny. But when it was open, they realized that there was no place for the service reps to hang their coats in the middle of winter. It was embarrassing. I remember having a talk with the architects about it after, and they felt badly. Why was that so? Because at some critical stage, the right people were not at the table. So I think that it's always important then to think about inclusion as we think about that. But that's at one level. You see, I always argue that inclusion is important because every perspective matters. Every voice is important. You cannot build sustainable capacity and thereby build resilience without inclusion. Failure to be inclusive is in fact planning to fail. It diminishes buy-in and commitment, and it leaves staff to staff attrition later on. Frankly, it's like battening down the front door in a hurricane, but leaving the back door and the windows wide open, and then being surprised by the damages that you have sustained. You see, in the classroom, we must resolve once again to really make sure that we have inclusion in every sense of that word. We must make our practices as inclusive as possible. As I've said somewhere else, while I like the Jamaican education motto, every child should learn, every child must learn, I want to add my own inclusive statement. Every child should be heard. Every child must be heard. As educators, we need to examine our classroom practices and the pedagogy to ensure that we're not just teaching to the few in the front and ignoring the majority in the back. As someone who's been in the classroom for almost 40 years, I've long recognized that many of the students sitting in the back, seemingly disconnected and uninterested, are not poor students, but they're really bright students who are experiencing lots of external challenges. You see, my friends, it's really hard to focus on an abstract algebra problem when you have no breakfast that morning, and also have to worry about whether your family will have a place to live next week. As your single mom perhaps just lost her job and your dad is nowhere to be found. If we are truly to be successful, we need to be reaching out to those young men and women in the back and make sure that we can find a way to really include them in the conversation, to understand what is going on in their lives. If we hope to transform education, we must also transform pedagogy. No longer can we afford to just listen to the few voices in the classroom. Research has shown us clearly, engaged learners learn more than those who are unengaged. As educators, we must consider how race and class and gender differences affect engagement and therefore learning. Recently, for example, I've had concern about the fact, and I'm sure many of you do as well, how our boys are in fact lagging behind our girls in performance. And this is made especially manifest when you look at the data in our tertiary institutions. In fact, I recently read something where UNESCO has really said that that gap in Jamaica particularly is concerning and is probably one of the widest in the world. Now, we're not alone, of course, don't get me wrong, because it also happens here in America. But I think it's something we need to look at, because I recently read a book called Boys Learn Differently, a guide for teachers and parents by Michael Gurian of the Gurian Institute. And it left me wondering and thinking, are we missing something in our education, acculturation of our students, especially our young boys? I'm not professing to be a sociologist and have the answer. I'm merely asking the question. If you haven't read that book, it's not too late, I think, to include that on your summer reading. We need to ask ourselves, are we missing something? What it is that is really happening in that sphere? Gender matters, and gender gap is something that we need to look at. Finally, equity. You see, this topic is really close to my heart. And I want to say first and quickly that by equity, I don't mean equality of outcome, but rather equality of opportunity. My definition of equity relates to the educational experiences is that students, teachers, administrators, and other stakeholders must be granted equal opportunity to participate and benefit from the system. As you all know so well, our inherited colonial educational system was not built on equitable principles, but rather on inequitable treatment of the Black majority, the sons and daughters of slave masters. After all, our masters knew so very well the transformative power of education, and that to grant equitable access to education would be a recipe for the destruction of the very economy and society from which they disproportionately benefited. Fast forward to now. Today, as we celebrate 60 years of independence, without doubt, we've made significant strides in education. Back in 1962, only a small minority of our students at the primary level went on to earn secondary education. Back then, there was only 1 degree granted institution, and it was reserved mostly for those in the upper echelons of our society. After all, even if one was qualified to enter, the barriers at the cost of tuition would be a major barrier for many. Even as late as the mid-70s, when I went to the university at Mona, when access was more open, I recall reading that less than 1% of Caribbean high school students went on to be enrolled in tertiary education. I knew then that that was not good. And yes, it is better today, but perhaps we need to push more in that direction. Thanks to the many progressive actions that have been taken since then, we've now had several tertiary institutions across the country, including many community colleges that never existed back then. In addition, today, the majority of our primary school students go on to secondary level education. But notwithstanding those achievements, it shouldn't be surprising to learn that in many ways, we still have a far way to go. As is well documented in the recent Patterson report, almost half of the students leaving primary level could be considered functionally illiterate and enumerate. And that's a big concern because they're moving on, therefore, to the secondary level where their success will be impaired. It is reported that over 70% of our secondary school leavers pass less than 5 CXC courses. And in fact, only 45% of CAPE students attain the 6th form diploma, having, with requisite passes. It is clear that we have some work still to do. But ladies and gentlemen, as Jamaicans, we never give up. That's why we are gathered here, because we want to move this ball forward, because the goal is not yet there. And we need to make the change to get us to 2030, a date that we have set, a date that we'd like to see some progress in all kinds of ways. But how does all this relate to equity, you say? Here's how. If we were to disaggregate the data that I just shared and take a closer look at these, we would see great discrepancies. We would see, for example, that the impact in our society is not equal. But in fact, in many cases, it impacts the communities that are most desperately in need of our help. A student from the inner city or from a remote rural district is more likely to be in the bottom half of the performance spectrum. If there's one thing the pandemic has taught us so well, is that it's a disproportionately will affect those who are poor. It's not accidental. You see, within this demographic, they're more likely to have less access to resources they need to succeed. In addition, students from such marginalized communities are also those who have less resilience for a variety of reasons that I have no time to really get into. It is also places where capacity is less in all the ways that we just described capacity. Further, I wouldn't be surprised at all to find that these are the very same places where the crime rates are high, where dropout rates are higher than average, and where all the things that matter are also lower than average. My friends, equity absolutely matters. And while this one is a major challenge, it is one that we must address, because there can be no transformation unless we really solve this discrepant equity issue. Education will be limited in its capacity to transform society, at least for the whole of society, and not just some in society, if we do not address these. In concluding, friends, let me highlight 3 points again. To transform society, education is not only the answer, it is the only answer. But in order for education to transform our society, we must first transform education. And of course, to transform education, we have to transform our educators. We have to think differently. I read something what says, if you look at things differently, it will begin to look different. So we need to change our mindset. Finally, in order to transform education, we must focus attention on 4 main things. Continuing to strengthen our collective resilience, building out our educational capacity, both in human and physical terms, embracing inclusive pedagogy and practices, and creating an equitable learning environment and system for our students. So, on this, our 60th anniversary of independence, let me again urge our leaders to resolve to make education the primary agent of social change in Jamaica, and to empower educational stakeholders to rise to the occasion. Ladies and gentlemen, as you go forth with your deliberations over the next 2 days, I want you to know that by hosting this conference, you're once again renewing your commitment to the promise that education is the key to transforming our Jamaica, our sweet Jamaica, our island in the sun, the land of our birth. Thank you so much. And I hope that this will be a most productive summer conference. Thanks, everybody.
That was awesome. That was awesome. Thank you so very kindly, Dean Salmon, for such a wonderful presentation. We appreciate the time you have taken out to be with us. At this time, we want to move on to our first panel. And I'd like to introduce you to Miss Leslie Samuel, and she will be doing the honors at this point in time. Leslie, please take over.
Well, thank you so very much, Dr. Gordon, and good morning, colleagues. Oh my goodness, I am so excited to be here with you all. Was that a phenomenal keynote address or what? Did he tell us what we needed to know here to get us through these next 2 mornings? I am pumped, and I hope you are too. What I heard, education is the key to everything. And so here we are this morning. We are going to be educated. I was looking at the title of our conference, and all of us saw the pushing forward with RISE, resilience, inclusion, capacity, equity. I wonder how many of you saw the next line that says, creating safe spaces through practical and realistic educational best practices. It is therefore fitting that we begin this conference after, of course, Dean Salmon's keynote, that we have a discussion about best practices, what they are, what they mean to us, and certainly what we can do to implement them in our spaces. With us to have that discussion, we have 3 phenomenal educators with us this morning to talk about why best practices matters. Notice that it's a question, okay? So we're going to hopefully answer that question over the next hour. Our 3 presenters who will be joining our panel discussion are Dr. Albert Benjamin. Dr. Benjamin is the acting vice president of academic affairs at the Mico University College, or as we all fondly know as the Mico. He has a Bachelor of Science in Biochemistry and a Master of Education from the University of the West Indies, a diploma in teaching from the Mico University College, and a doctoral degree in teacher identity from the University of Sheffield in the United Kingdom. He has done pioneering work in developing STEM curricula for higher education and teacher professional development, and is presently a member of the National STEM Task Force. His research interests include teacher professional identity and effective pedagogies in science teacher education. He has successfully led several international STEM consultancies with the IDB, OASITEN, and the British Council. Also joining us will be Mrs. Michelle Campbell. Mrs. Campbell is the Director of Cross-Sectorial Coordination at the Early Childhood Commission, has been with the Commission for the past 12 years. She currently leads the coordinated and integrated delivery of early childhood programs and services across ministries, agencies, and stakeholders. Mrs. Campbell holds a bachelor's and master's degrees in early childhood education from Nova Southeastern University and a specialized graduate certificate in working with infants and toddlers with special needs from the University of Central Florida. And certainly last, but definitely not least, is Dr. Margaret Chen. Dr. Chen is the Assistant Secretary General at the Jamaica Teachers Association. She is a 22-year veteran educator, local and regional workshop presenter, and conference speaker. She received her doctorate in education from the University of Sheffield in England, a Master of Science in Special Education from Nova Southeastern University, and a BS Bachelor of Science in School Counseling from Western Carolina University. She also holds a certification in early childhood education from the University of the West Indies. a former lecturer at the Jamaica University College in the Department of Special Education. Dr. Chin also has experience at the early childhood, primary, and secondary levels in guidance and counseling, special education, and gifted and talented programs. So, with that, ladies and gentlemen, please get your pens and paper ready to take notes and make sure to post your thoughts and certainly your questions in the chat so that we can have a robust engagement and discussion later on in our hour. So let's begin. Dr. Benjamin, I'm going to begin with you. Your definition, please, sir, of what is a best practice, and share with us your experience with either developing or using them.
Well, Madam Moderator, thank you very much, in particular for reaching out to us last night to clarify your expectations, and after reading your expectations, I found that I didn't have much more to do. It seemed as if we were on the same wavelength.
Awesome.
Yes, but allow me please to just greet persons in the audience. We won't go into the long list of dignitaries, but it will be remiss of me not to at least mention the conference chair, Dr. Gordon. Extremely important work being done here, both you and Mr. Leo Gilling, for putting this together, particularly right after independence in Jamaica. I don't know if that was a deliberate action. It must have been. I can't imagine it being such a coincidence that you want to set our agenda for the rest of the year, and certainly in relation to this matter of independence. P.S. Dwyer and former PS, Mrs. Foster Allen, I greet you, and President of JTA with 14 days to go. Big things can happen in overnight, so let us see. And of course, Dr. Simon, Keynote speaker. Greetings to you all and colleagues in Jamaica and abroad. We tend to remember more of what we see and not just what we hear. I don't know if I can just share my my screen to go through quickly a perspective that I have very few slides, Madam Samuel. As I mentioned, I had done a little bit of preparation. So I want to just say a few words and get out of the way to allow the smooth flow. So I've can you see, is everybody seeing my screen?
Yes, we can see your screen.
Okay. So I've defined best practice. Of course, we could go into some. I've seen a number of definitions, but I chose to keep it as accessible as possible. Best practice in relation to how I'm going to discuss it or speak about it is about getting the best results. It's a standard or a set of guidelines that is known to result in success. We heard keynote speakers speaking about success over and over. Also embedded within that was the notion of failure as well. But it's best practice are important for the purpose of, best practices are important for the purpose of generating the best results. So I want to do two very brief studies to highlight the value of best practices. I won't call it studies. Actually, these are just vignettes because a study of Bob Marley or of Usain Bolt would require something delving deep into identity. We should be looking at family origins and all of these things. We're not going there. That's a very brief vignette to demonstrate the value of best practice in relation to putting on the table two key elements from these two national stalwarts. So if you take a look at the first one, Bob Marley, he was a man with no time, with a mission that no one in popular music has ever attempted before. And he managed to popularize a music that once sounded strange to everybody. And you know, there's no debate at this point in time that Bob Marley is a great stalwart of Jamaica. But what was he trying to notice? He was on a mission. And if you're going to find value from best practice, there has to be something behind it. Not best practice for best practice sake. It is a means to an end. Mentioning before on the matter of results. So he wanted to find a way to put across truths about people outside Jamaica and America, about and Europe. He wanted to put forward truths about Jamaicans to people across the world. And he wanted to speak for a world outside of his familiar borders. a world that he did not even know very much about. So Marley wasn't singing about how peace could come easily to the world, but rather how hell on earth comes too easily to too many. He knew the conditions that he was singing about. And this is the key point I want to raise here from this vignette. His songs weren't about theory or conjecture or an easy, distant compassion. His songs were his memories. He had lived with the wretched. He had seen the down pressers and those whom they pressed down. He had been shot. It was shot at. His ability to describe all this in palpable and authentic ways that sustain his body of music, unlike any other we've ever seen or known. So the key point I want to raise from this vignette is that he was an expert in what he was speaking about. And so one of the key things to be able to develop a best practices come from expertise. We don't want to have an expert dentist working on our V6 engine, do we? So expertise is critical and particular to the relevant discipline or area in which you're looking to create a best practice. So you need experts to do it. Bob Marley, an example of one such. But the other thing that I want to think about now, this is a matter of Usain Bolt. Expertise is not all that we need. What you also want to look at in the context of heading towards a goal or a mission are problems that are going to be necessary that we have to solve. And so here we had Usain Bolt. What was his problem? He had poor mechanics, suffered from poor performance and constant injuries. What was the solution? His coach came up with a set of best practice plans to address or solve the problems Usain Bolt was having, ultimately to make him become the world's arguably greatest sprinter. He focused on strength training for power and speed to reduce risk of injuries and improve performance. So he solved the performance problem that way. Sprint training used for Bolt focused on building the strength required to resist the forces coming from long, speedy runs. Bolt used a combination of strength training and core general exercises, jumps, throws, and Olympic lifting to improve his strength. To improve the sprint mechanics, Mills improved Bolt's technique. The training program was long-term and took 2 years for him to get to where he needed to go to. So this is a customized example of a solving of a problem that may plague an individual or may plague an institution, organization. Now, as it relates to teacher education, which is where my passion lies, I can talk a little bit about that. I happen to know a little bit more than about music or about athletics. We need to have in the teaching context all best practices as well. And when I look across the world, what I observe is teacher-educator standards. Now, sad to say, and I mean, I'm sure Dr. Gordon is also a little unhappy about this, we don't have teacher-educator standards articulated here in this region. I went and took a look and I found this list, and it is actually for CARICOM. So there are CARICOM teacher-educator standards, which I think we don't have to reinvent the wheel. This was a study done across the region, and recommendations were sent forward, and I think it was a 2018 CARICOM document. But it speaks about knowledge. Remember, I spoke about Bob Marley's expertise. So you have to know what you're doing, and you have to focus on expertise in order to ensure that best practices emerge. Professional practice and professional engagement. Now I want to zero in very briefly on the last part here in terms of professional practice, models appropriate teaching behaviors. We talk about, our keynote speaker spoke about the need for us to take a look at ourselves. In how we prepare teachers, there is an area here that I believe needs to be addressed. And the Jamaica University College is working on it. We believe that we have to take a more hands-on approach to preparing our teachers. That is to say, we want to have not just preparing our teachers, not just about teaching classes and marking scripts. We have to take a more intimate investment in each one of these persons that are being prepared to be teachers. And we have come up with the idea of the professional success coach. After looking at several best practices across the world, we believe that this is a model that we want to take a look at the Jamaica University College, and perhaps also to see if we can broaden it across all sister institutions if persons are so inclined. To have an approach where it's not just about the classroom, but we want to say, okay, in the context of a professional success coach, what does this coach do? And it's not just a mentor, it's not just a coach, it's a combination. So what does the coach do? Provide it's a nurturing process in which a more skilled person, serving as a role model, teaches, sponsors, encourages, counsels a less skilled or experienced protege. And the purpose of this is to promote both the development of the professional success coach and the development of the protege. Because it's very interesting. I don't know if every one of you here that has been a parent, you realize that you are both learning. You're bringing your child forward, but because your child expects things from you, you have to model a better, model improved behavior over time. So both people benefit. And the role is to facilitate reflective practice, collaborative planning, action research, coupled with a joint, what we call a professional success plan that the mentor and protege develop together, and they work on it over the entire time that the person is being prepared. And the outcome, student success. The Mike University College centers all of its activities around ensuring student success. And as well, to ensure that both mentor and protege soar to new heights of professional growth and competence. We won't go too much in detail about what we plan to do, but just to say that the idea is that the professional success coach and protege will work together tightly over 2 semesters, and thereafter they move into a different kind of relationship. So semester 1, professional development, they have a preparation where both persons have preparation, initiation, cultivation, separation, and redefinition of the relationship. The first phase, professional development of the coach, the protege, registration, orientation, psychometric test, then initiation and needs assessment is done. The protege develops a 4-year professional success plan, and in cultivation, the plan is monitored by the professional success coach in interaction with the protege. The protege implements the plan over a period of time, develops a portfolio, and eventually moves on to become a coach of a junior peer. So one of the things that we know is that you learn more by teaching it. So after the final semester, the second semester, each person would have gone through this cycle would now start to coach the person, coach a junior peer coming up. Now, I want to finish with this slide. What is the risk if we don't think about working with best practice? What is the risk that we are going to have to encounter? Mediocrity is the risk of not adapting best practices. And what does mediocre literally mean? Halfway up a mountain. A person who is content to occupy the middle level. Mediocre is mistakenly equated with average, where average meets the minimum standard and has the possibility of improvement. Mediocre is substandard and static. Mediocrity's aim is to ease the workload, get away with the least effort, avoid accountability, and ensure perpetuity. Mediocre people sort of give up on improving and even on giving their best. They just plow through the day, doing what needs to be done, but without much interest and with no intention of going above and beyond the call of duty. I will stop there.
Good morning, everyone. Michelle Campbell from the Early Childhood Commission. And as you can you see my baby dolls, my infants and my toddlers? And we're here all about early childhood development. And with the focus being creating safe spaces through practical and realistic educational best practices, we have to look at the foundation, our infants and our toddlers and our preschoolers. Now, the scope of the Early Childhood Commission is to improve quality through early childhood care, development, and education. And we do this through regulation and monitoring, as well as other technical areas here at the Commission, because the sole purpose is to prepare our young children for their best success at primary education and throughout life. And thereafter, our best practices really looks at standards and strategy. So let me put my little ones down so we can talk a little bit more. So at the Early Childhood Commission, we look at our 12 standards, and this should be very, you can't see, but it should be very familiar to you, where we look at 12 specific areas for best outcomes for children and families. We look at staffing, we look at developmental and educational programming, we look at interactions and relationships with children, we look at the physical environment. We also look at the indoor, outdoor furnishing, supplies, and equipment for children. We look at health, nutrition, safety, child rights and protection. We look at how we interact with the community and stakeholders. We also look at the administration of the institution and how we're financing that institution. So at the Commission, we have a team of individuals that support the institutions through our field officers, where we look at our inspectors and development officers. Now, best practices, remember, we have to be the voice for our young children. And when we look at best practices, we have to look at child development, making sure that we're current with child development and those particular outcomes, as well as looking at the culture, looking at our Jamaican culture and looking at our spiritual values that all makes up that best practices here at the Early Childhood Commission and within our sector itself. Now, for example, when we look at developmental and educational programming, a best practice would be one, to have a curriculum that is very supportive for children, all children, typical and atypical children. And a non-best practice, just to compare, a good practice is to have that curriculum. A non-best practice is not to have a curriculum, because if it's not in place, then we don't know what we're supposed to do and what our children are expected to learn and encounter. We know that children learn best through play. So a good practice is that a practitioner at the early childhood level is prepared daily for their children upon arrival. So the day before, you know what your activity plans look like, you know what you're supposed to prepare. A not so good practice is when you have your children at the table and you're preparing in front of them for that particular activity. So we're here to be practical, and that's what the focus is really on for this particular conference, is how practical we can be. And at the early childhood level, we have to be very practical, because health and safety is paramount. Supervision is paramount. And how then, as practitioners, we prepare for our children is very important. Now, the other area that we look at in terms of best practice is strategy. And the commission is on our third national strategic plan. And we're getting ready to prepare the fourth strategic plan that really looks at the life cycle of a child. So it's very easy to follow. We first look at parenting. We follow with health, because our children are born into their families. They begin to go to the health clinics for support. And then thereafter, we want to look at screening and early intervention. Looking at rice, you'll see all of the themes coming through our national strategic plan. Thereafter, we look at our institutions. By age 3, at least 99% of our children are entering an early childhood institution. So we have to make sure that with our 12 standards, which is a best practice, that our children are engaged appropriately. Following that, we look at teacher training and we look at curriculum, that capacity, who's in the classroom. Right now, we have 45% of teachers at the level 3 and degree diploma level, educating our children within the classroom, but not only educating, but taking care of them, looking at their social emotional development, making sure that, the PS talked about collaboration. How are our children collaborating in the early childhood curriculum and in the classroom, right? Through our daily schedule, we're going through teacher-led activities and child-led activities. We're going through group activities, small groups and large groups. So there you have that collaboration happening at the early childhood level. Thereafter, continuing on that life cycle from parenting all the way to when our children enter the classroom, we also have to look at our stakeholders and how are we building that equity amongst our stakeholders to support the early childhood sector through our ministries, departments, agencies, and NGOs as well, supporting this sector. Because again, this is the foundation. This is where we have to lead the focus in order to see the results. We also look at research, early childhood research, what's happening here in Jamaica, what's happening with our institutions as a whole. Approximately, we have 2,300 institutions serving over 120,000 children, with 12,000 practitioners serving the sector. Ooh, that was a mouthful. Yes, would you agree? That was a mouthful. So you can see why this has to be the focus at the early childhood level. So with our best practices of our 12 standards and our national strategic plan, this is how we get it done with our ministry, our parent Ministry of Education and Youth, and our partners. Now, there are two other areas. When we met with our stakeholders, they talked about public education, the ECC getting out there a little bit more, sharing their accomplishments and what we need to do to ensure that our children are prepared. And there with public education, we have developed a strategy. We're on social media. Let me tell you, we have lots of partners that have seen us and they've come on board to support us. And then finally, resource mobilization. We have been hit hard by the pandemic. and we've had to be resilient. And in terms of being resilient, we had to see how best to reach our children, because we know at the early childhood level, we have to be face-to-face. So online learning, although it was available to many of our children, it was still difficult because you need that face-to-face, that emotional development, that social involvement. And we had to print support materials for our practitioners. We had to deliver them at places. We were on television every day for a half an hour, engaging our parents and our practitioners and our children through our activity plans. We partnered with many various entities to develop learning kits. So we put together learning kits with paper and crayons and puzzles and blocks and storybooks and coloring books, and taught our families how to use them and how to interact with their children on a daily basis. Because through play is when we really learn to trust and take risks and collaborate and problem solve. So making sure that we had that in place to support our practitioners along the way. Now, in terms of capacity, we continue to work with our teachers. We have training plans for our teachers, and based on our classroom observation tool that we use to observe our teachers to see how they're taking approaches to learning, how they're interacting with children. From there, we're building capacity based on those particular training needs. From our inspection reports, the results really highlight the achievements and the areas that we need to improve upon. And there again, you're looking at best practices. So a best practice for health, one, being able to wash your hands, going to the sink and seeing that we have a hand washing method. Before COVID, we were doing everything that we were advised to do for the COVID period. So we were already hand washing, but the next best practice would be to start brushing your teeth. So let's start looking at dental health. So we look at general overall health, but the next best practice that you would find through the 12 standards would be dental. We brush after each meal because your mouth is the beginning point to your health. So these types of best practices are also outlined in our 12 standards, as well as, we focus on what we must achieve, and then we also focus on what would be next for our institutions. Going from there, inclusion. Through our National Strategic Plan, Screening and Early Intervention, we have seen many strides in this particular area. If you know, we have the Child Health Development Passport that was launched back in September of 2010, and every child from that point on has a passport. And from there, it begins to measure child development and health. Now, when you get into an early childhood institution, at age 4, we begin to screen our children. That is the recommended age from research. We look at approaches to learning, we look at early literacy, we look at early numeracy, we look at behavior. And based on that, and I must say that this particular year, we would have assessed approximately 35,000 4-year-old children. We're in the process now of shading the results so that we would be able then to share with every parent, every teacher, every institution how the 4-year-old children are doing. And then from there, looking at the next level. So we have a secondary screening. So based on our Jamaica School Readiness Assessment, which screens all age 4 children, from there now we'll be able to look at those children that might need a secondary screening that looks further at development. And that's what we call the Ages and Stages Questionnaire for Jamaica. And this is where the University of the West Indies and the University of Oregon came together. The University of Oregon came to Jamaica to look at ages and stages to make sure it was culturally appropriate for our children. And I must say that this is something that's used internationally as a tool for secondary assessment, but Jamaica has its own. So from there, we meet with the parent, we meet with the child, and together we develop that plan for that child going forward. The Early Childhood Commission then looks for the best resources within that particular area, that parish. We work with the Special Education Unit at the Ministry of Education and Youth, and we also work with the Early Stimulation Program through the Ministry of Labor and Social Security. So you can see that we ensure that inclusion is at its highest. We're also, for the first time for the year of early childhood, we have what we call our legacy projects. And the legacy project focuses on ensuring that we have inclusive classrooms within all of our infant schools and departments, and early childhood institutions. So this is really looking at making sure that our atypical children are in the same spaces with our typical children and making sure that they're getting those particular services that they need. Now, when we look at equity, again, the scope of the commission, our mission, our vision is to ensure that there is equity and access of quality early childhood education. And it's important that, again, the best practice looking at the 12 standards, because no matter if you're in St. Thomas or you're near Westmoreland, we should all be following the standards, and those are the best practices that we would have in place for early childhood. We know that early childhood is the focus, and we look forward to developing additional relationships with partners, looking at this particular area, because it's the research that's going to really drive. And our guest keynote speaker spoke about that by primary, our children are really not ready. So we have to get them ready at the early childhood level. When we look at the curriculum and we look at resilience, I must say, I'm excited because through our curriculum, we have 6 learning outcomes, and one outcome looks specifically at resilience and how children cope. And it speaks to how a child develops their coping skills and how they show persistence with challenging tasks, taking a risk, and using acceptable social skills to cope with difficulties. And that's embedded in the curriculum. So for our children, when we look at not only, the numeracy and the literacy, we also have to look at transitions. We have to look at interactions. We have to look at their social skills, right? We have to look at the schedule. So how does a day for a child evoke all of these different areas, right? So once a parent, another best practice, once a parent comes in with their child, that teacher should be greeting them by name. They should be greeting the child by name. They should have them prepared and ready to go. How we see that child separate from that parent or that caregiver shows another form of resilience, yes? And how they cope. Now, how they go off and they work independently in learning centers is another form of resilience. How they take on that task, because I might be at a task and I might need a couple more minutes, and my teacher sees that frustration on my face and she says, okay, Michelle, guess what? We have to get ready for lunch, but I'm gonna give you 5 more minutes and you're gonna leave what you've built so that you can get back to it later. So that's helping me with my skills going throughout the day. So it's so important that when you step into an early childhood classroom, you feel welcomed, you feel engaged, you feel like you can trust the individuals that are taking care of you so that you can build that resilience, right? And that trust, all based on our standards and our national strategic plan. So
thank you so very much, Mrs. Campbell. Thank you so very much. That was very thorough. I appreciate all that you have shared with us relative to the early childhood space. And please forgive me, everyone, if you haven't figured it out. That was Mrs. Michelle Campbell from the Early Childhood Commission. I did not get a chance to properly introduce her. So next up is Dr. Margaret Chin, who will share with us her experience with best practices that she would like to share.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure being here. Thank you, Leslie, and thank you, Dr. Noel Gordon, for the invitation. And I'd like to also welcome my fellow colleagues on the platform, Michelle and Albert. I hope I can add another perspective to the discussion. Leslie, you asked about defining best practices. And I want to put a different twist on it in terms of how the term best practices has evolved to what we now call effective practices. Because best practices, when you think of the word best, you actually contextualize the whatever it is you're describing as best. And so it has evolved. It is grounded in research, and I'm going to be talking about my experience a little bit later on. It's grounded in research, and so it's called research-based practice as well. But I want us to think of best practices or effective practices as a process. And within this process, we have trial and errors. And I think the system of education in Jamaica has evolved primarily through some amount of trial and error. But trial and error provides us as educators with such great opportunities to self-reflect. Because it is through that process of self-reflection that I think we're where we are now, especially in education. So best practices really, to me, is a process that is, it's grounded in research, it's ongoing, it's dynamic, it provides opportunities for reflection and also provides opportunity for growth. Now, I speak of growth in the context of, and I'm glad Dr. Benjamin is here with me speaking from the tertiary level, because again, through that process of trial and error, it provides a wonderful opportunity for action research to take place within the classroom. And so teachers become researchers. And from my experience, I don't think we have been promoting that as much as we should. I still see teachers, and I sit here from the JTA speaking from the portfolio I have. Teachers are still yet, and I'm talking about teachers now who are active in the classroom, not pre-service teachers. Teachers who are active in their craft, not necessarily seeing themselves as action researchers and carrying out action research on a regular basis. For some of them, it was a course that they did at college, and I'm sure Albert can back me up. They get their graded do well, but how do we help teachers to continue on that trajectory of conducting action research in their classroom? That will eventually lead to effective practice. And so I want us to just think and marinate on that a little bit more, because it is through that action research that we actually get what is called evidence-based practice. The evidence is right in front of you. You now become familiar with what works and what doesn't work, and add to the body of research that is out there. So from where I sit, I think we need to probably engage more in action research. There are a lot of pockets of excellence happening right across the island. I've been exposed to them. I've been to schools where I see it in action, but it needs to be promoted a little bit more for other persons to experience. And I must plug in something here. The JTA, we are actually now in the process of launching our Professional Development Institute, where these pockets of excellence will be identified and shared freely, not only to the members of the association, but to all teachers across the island. So it is important for us to be involved in evidence-based practice so we can deliver good results to our students. Another thing, and Dr. Benjamin actually touched on it, the teacher using his or her professional wisdom. So that professional wisdom, coupled with evidence-based practice, will lead to effective practice as well. And I just want to share, based upon my own research and my own experience, some of the things that for me helps to define what effective practice is all about. It helps to set high standards. And I'm not just speaking high standards in terms of for our students, but high standards for teachers. And I noticed Dr. Benjamin as well alluded to the fact that in terms of our own context, Jamaica, we haven't really had those standards in terms of professional development and so on set for us. But effective practice, best practices, it really helps to set high standards and expectations of our educators, of our students. And so teachers become dedicated to providing high quality instruction to our students. But how do we provide this high quality? It has to be modeled. Teachers have to see on a daily basis best practices being implemented and best practices being shared. And so again, it goes back to the whole evidence-based practice that teachers will be exposed to. Another thing too, it helps to, how would I put this? It helps to provide a balance. And so I heard Michelle talking a while ago, and I had to smile at some parts because many of the standards that we set, especially at the early childhood level, are based upon more European standard, American standards of what we think child development is. And so as we evolve as we go through the process of best practice, I am hoping that we will now deconstruct, if I could use that word, decolonize what we think child development is. Because, and that's why I talk about balance. So we, on one hand, have the European standard, the American standard of child development, how children learn and so on. But at the same time, how do we balance it based upon our own realities, our own context as Jamaican, as a Caribbean people? How do Caribbean children develop? How do Jamaican children develop? And how do we strike that balance against the international standards? And so another thing too is that best standards, from my experience, helps to build leadership. And it's not just leadership at the administrative level, meaning your principals and vice principals and so on. It's helping teachers to understand within their own classroom that they are leaders. Classroom management leaders, instructional leaders. And so the more you're exposed to best practice and effective practice, and through self-reflection and action research, you begin to appreciate your own leadership skills. And I want to touch on curriculum and instruction. We have all read the Patterson report. I shed a couple tears, Leslie, and over the report myself, and I read some of the especially the fact that we spend so much money from gaining so little.
Mm-hmm.
But effective practice, best practice, actually, if implemented and modeled, it can help us to understand the relationship between how children learn and the curriculum that we provide to our children, the expectations that we have of our children, and how we can implement a research-based curriculum that speaks to the innate nature of our own children. Accountability and assessment. Best practices will also help us to understand the relationship between how we instruct, how we assess, and how assessment can drive the instruction, and that cycle goes on. So again, it goes back to evidence-based, teachers identifying a variety of valid and how would I put it, valid and reliable instructional methods to use in their classrooms. That's my 2 cents piece, because I know you're going to have some more questions after this. So I'm going to pause here for my other
discussion now.
To jump in. Yes.
Yes. Thank you so very much, Dr. Chin.
Thank you.
You hit on some wonderful points. If I can please ask our tech team, can I please have all 3 presenters on screen along with me, so that we can have as close to a discussion as we can, so that everyone can see all 4 of us at the same time. I would appreciate that. Can we have that to happen, please? Yes, yes. Well, while they figure out how to do that, we'll proceed. So, Dr. Benjamin, Mrs. Campbell, Dr. Chin, each of you mentioned in your own way the word standards, as if to suggest that standards and best practices are synonymous. I'm not so sure about that. Do you agree? Are they one and the same? I am putting myself in the space of a teacher, okay? And I'm hearing this discussion about best practices. And I always thought, best practices is that thing that is over there, that is written, and bound in a book, and that I can reference at my discretion. When in fact, what I heard from you, Dr. Chin, is that no, it is not something that is over there. It is a process. It is something that I engage in, that I have an opportunity to impact. So I struggle with process and standards. So help me connect the 2, please. I am still waiting for all 4 of us to be on screen. Dr. Gordon, are we going to get there?
I think you're all on screen.
I am no.
Yes,
no, all 4 of us need to be spotlit, please.
Yes, you guys are you're there. Can you see yourselves on your spotlight?
Yes, I'm
Yes,
seeing
Okay.
four parts, yes.
Maybe you're
I
not
am only
seeing it.
seeing one. I guess maybe that's why I'm not seeing all
they're all
four
there.
of us. So, but no worries. As long as our viewers can see all four of us, that's all that matters. So the correlation then between process and standards, help me with that. I'm a teacher. What am I really doing? Am I referencing a standard, or am I also engaged in the process, or is it both?
well, I can
Like
take
to
a
take
stab
that,
at it. I'll take
Dr.
a stab at it.
Benjamin. Mhm.
But I like to use what Dr. Chin talked about in terms of the evolving nature of the idea, but to put it in the context of the evolving nature of best practices per se, because a best practice is something that it does not necessarily remain the same depending on the context in which you find yourself. You may have a best practice today, but in a few months' time, you may have to shift it because it's no longer serving the purpose. In my mind, a standard is a more overarching idea, and they may inure to more enduring, lifespan. Best practice tends to be more organic, and it can emerge, or typically emerges and is useful in what you refer to as a learning organization. In an organization where it is encouraged to solve problems or to find best ways of doing something, and you provide opportunities for the information to be shared, as Dr. Chin talked about. Sharing best practices is one of the goals of the JTA going forward. So the best practice can emerge out of the lived experience, ordinary everyday lived experience, designed to impact a larger overarching standard, but the two ultimately serve to accomplish the same thing. You want the best results. You need to find the best results as standards, and you may have best practices to work towards it. Or they could even be, something, a best practice could influence a standard over time.
Awesome. All right. Dr. Chin or Ms. Campbell, I would either you like to add anything?
For me, looking back at the practical with what Dr. Benjamin just talked about, the lived experience, right? So the Early Childhood Commission, we have over 100 brain builder centers where the government of Jamaica has established these centers for children 3 months to 3 years of age. And a best practice that is lived, for example, a parent brings in a child who's in a diaper, the diaper needs to be changed, right? That parent is handing over that child to the teacher, that practitioner. The practitioner now is to accept that child, right? And not to question the parent about why that diaper is not changed, but to accept that child, greet the parent, let them know what the day is going to be looking like, because again, we're looking at the social and emotional balance of the parent and that child. We don't know what that parent has been through, and we don't know what that child has been through. So as the teacher now, we're now to take best practice and to take that child, greet the parent, and then to change that diaper, and then to transition that child into an activity. So I think I agree. It's lived, it's practiced, it's evolving, and it can change. And that's okay based on the research, based on the experiences, based on what we've collected. So I do agree.
Excellent. So teachers, colleagues realize that this is an active opportunity for each of us to be a part of best practices, if you will. I rather like your view, Dr. Chin, of not calling it necessarily best, but effective. Because what is effective in your classroom may not be quite as effective in my classroom. So we need to be open to that concept. Did you want to add anything, Dr. Chin?
I also want to, because I think in the mix of all of this, we also have to consider the cultural context in which schools operate. And I'm just going to pick on the early childhood, because the early childhood has different layers in terms of, we have infant schools that are government owned, we have community basic schools, and so on. And in terms of how they view themselves, for instance, I know, because I've worked in the infant school sector, all the teachers there are trained in terms of college trained. In the community basic schools, there may not be that ratio of college trained teachers. And so the mindsets and the approaches and so on will be different. So we also have to think about that cultural aspect to it. Because each school has its own set of nuances, its own culture and so on. And so as the best practice evolve, are these practices that we can use across the board? Are these practices that we can use contextually? Who says that these practices are best? Who says that
Good
they are the
question.
best?
Very good. You know, we talked about, Dr. Benjamin, you started out by talking about the fact that the standards that you shared were based on CARICOM standards. Dr. Chin, you mentioned that, you know, early best practices, if you will, were based on European standards, American standards, etc. But now you're talking about essentially the cultural context. That is what is unique to Jamaica. And so it would appear then that, you know, what is a best practice in other places may not necessarily work as well for us here in Jamaica. And so I ask, it sounds like our teachers need to come to this whole subject of best practice or effective practice with an open mind to reading and understanding, but not necessarily feeling like they have to embrace 100%. Do you agree with that?
Yes, yes.
Yeah,
And that is why I'm so gung-ho on action research, because it's through these authentic experiences that teachers will be given an outlet to share what's been happening and what's been working in their context.
Right. So I want to ask one more question that I hope is a little bit thought-provoking. And you touched on it in your comments, Dr. Benjamin, and then I'd like to open it up to our colleagues to see what questions they may have. So, you know, while I was preparing for this session, I came across an article, Dr. Benjamin, that essentially reflects the comment that you added at the very end of your presentation. And it was a gentleman, it was from a gentleman by the name of Austin Knight. He's a lead designer at Square. I don't know how many of you are aware of Square. It's an e-commerce tool. And he said this. He says, best practices, while useful in some respects, are generally one-size-fits-all solutions that do not account for context of unique audiences, products, and businesses or organizations. This kills innovation and propels organization towards a state of mediocrity. Your very words, Dr. Benjamin. To encourage true organic solutions that generate measurable results, businesses and organizations should break away from best practices by questioning the status quo and running quantitative tests, talking to users, and running qualitative tests, developing multidisciplinary teams, and promoting a culture that embraces risk. Essentially, Dr. Chin, exactly what you were just saying, needs to be research-based, and it needs to be a model, but not necessarily implemented as such. So, comments on the views of Mr. Knight.
Well, I think Mr. Knight has hit the nail on the head in a way in relation to the value of an organization that embraces best practices. As I mentioned, as we've been saying, it is something that evolves. And so, whereas a standard may be sort of more rigid because standards tend to be universal and tend to have more broad impact, the best practice for an organization should and can evolve. But I'll make a quick point about it. You see, it's important that for such an organization to develop or to thrive, it's important that a culture of disruption, if you will, is embraced and encouraged. And by disruption, sometimes the word can be, it's a problematic word. But I keep, whenever time I say it, I feel it's important to qualify it. Digicel was an example of disruption where prior to that, it was an elite context in which you could access remote calling services. Digicel came in and made the platform equitable. And that's what disruption should really ultimately lead to, should expand and increase opportunity for persons. So if you have an organization that has a posture of expanding opportunity for participation of all persons, because sometimes it can be intimidating, you find yourself in a context and you have a best practice doing well, and rather than encouraging you to come out and share this best practice, the culture there is quite anti that. The culture may be about keeping score, leveling the playing field, and sort of vindictive and difficult mentality. We know what that experience can be like. But you can have a culture that is what they call meritocratic, where you are encouraged to come forward, and persons based on performance, based on getting results, are able to come out and share in a space and in an appropriate way expand and move forward. So yes, I embrace the comments just to point out that best practices are evolving, so it's not a one size fits all. Each culture, each institution should develop a learning culture that promotes the best to emerge so that they can share the best results and accomplish the vision and the mission.
Okay, Dr. Chin, and then Mrs. Campbell, I'll give you the last word, and then we open for questions.
I totally agree with the comment, with the sentiments that you've read a while ago, and as Dr. Benjamin said, it's really thinking outside the box. It's about breaking the narrative, disrupting the narrative. I know historically we look at child development from an internal perspective. I'm just using an example. Child development has now evolved to look at external. How developed is the family? How developed is the school? How developed is the physical environment that the child grows in? So we have to start looking at things from another perspective. And as I said before, best is such a qualitative term. It doesn't speak to context. It doesn't speak to the peculiarities that happen within an organization, within an institution. And so, and I like how Dr. Benjamin brought it forward in terms of the institution, the organization itself has to think in terms of how do we evolve. Because when you think about it, schools, the teachers in schools are extremely talented, very creative and so on. But does the environment enable all of these attributes to come forward, which may eventually form best practices? And so the environment also has to be enabling, where we all think and give opportunities to people to think and to create and to problem solve together in order for best practices to evolve. So that's my 2 cents, please.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Mrs. Campbell, your scope is so wide. So all this creativity, might cause a little bit of a problem for you. But so talk to us about your feelings on Mr.
Well, yeah, and I'm glad that you mentioned the scope is so wide, because for the Early Childhood Commission, we have to first make sure that our children and teachers are safe and they're in healthy environments. Bottom line. So that's what we inspect for first. And then thereafter, we get creative, right? We get creative with all of the other areas. So for example, the curriculum is a guide. You don't necessarily have to follow it, but it's a guide, but you have to have a guide that you're using within the classroom. The teachers are very creative when they come to their activity plans and their schedules and their transitions and things like that, and how they observe their children. But at the same time, there's lots of room for involvement and for the culture. Each school has their own culture. When we go to inspect, we capture that culture based on our standards and what is best for children. So we embrace it. And yes, the scope is wide, but we can work within itself. Dr. Chin talked about, the infant schools having trained teachers and not necessarily our basic school. But then Ministry of Education is changing that, right? We're putting more trained teachers in our institutions. We're getting more teachers, we're facing the ratios, we're managing the ratios, we're meeting the ratios, we have additional training materials and additional staff in the classroom to support all of that. So we're changing and we are evolving, but at the same time, safety and health is paramount for us.
Okay, thank you so very much, all three of you. It looks like we're out of time. I thought we had 10 more minutes, but it appears not. Dr. Gordon, can you confirm for me, please? Do we have any more time or do we need to wrap here?
We need to wrap here so that we can let them out on time. And
on time, all right, okay. So my apologies to all of our colleagues who are online. We kind of got a little carried away with with the sharing. So let me just summarize, first of all, by thanking Dr. Benjamin, Mrs. Campbell, Dr. Chin. I thank you so very much for sharing your time and expertise with us this morning, as well as your perspective. I think we have all come away from this discussion with a much better understanding of not only what best practices and effective practices are and could be, but more importantly, the role that each of us can play in enhancing those practices as we go forward towards 2030 and the deadline that we have set for ourselves for truly transforming education for Jamaica. So with that, I thank you once again, and please permit me to introduce our next item on our agenda, and I believe it is a cultural expression event. And with us this morning is Mr. Ethan McNamee, who is the principal of the Broadleaf Primary School in Manchester, but who is a native of St. Thomas. This is an extraordinarily talented young man who certainly entertained us several days while here in New York. And I know, ladies and gentlemen, you are in for a treat. Mr. McNamee, delighted to have you. Please take it away.
Thank you so much, Leslie, and good morning, everybody. Good morning. It is indeed a pleasure to be sharing this morning with you on this platform. I will just move right along because it's Patwa I'm doing. I don't need to observe the protocol. I can just do what I want to do. Patwa make you do what you want to do. So I don't have to say anything about anybody who is on the platform. I can just move right along. That is how Patwa makes us more efficient. And maybe if we were teaching in Patwa and doing everything in Patwa, we would have been more efficient. Maybe we would need to start around the country in a Patwa. All right. Pushing forward with rice. Mighty God, who pay the price? It's such a fitting theme. No, sir, JD turn a letter of steam. First of all, rice is something what we eat. So me don't know how this end up in an education street. Resilience, inclusion, capacity, equity. Whole heap of big words them are used pan way. As if we say we not have no sense. Allow me, and nobody jump to them defense. Resilience, me know we have it enough. From Paul Bogle days, yet it's still rough. Each time we climb over one hurdle, here comes another to bring you to the rubble. Disappointment, diversion, delusion, disenchantment. Sometimes me just feel like we end the argument. But remember my granny word can done. She say, taking teeth, keep a heart bun. Cause when trouble take you, picnic shot fit you. Inclusion is just another illusion them create for decide with it. Or is it a stepping stone to make everybody feel great? Well, the organizer them must know. So no can ask Noel, Leslie, or even Leo. When somebody feel included, that make them easier to deal with. Me granny did say, make sure say, me know say, Jacka say the world no level and all man dinner now ready one time. But me ready for disrupt me granny narrative. Because guess what? I know my fault. She did ban primitive. Capacity, capacity, capacity. One word you will hear from now to eternity. Because no matter how you fill the space, you have to expand to stay in this race. You have to learn and relearn to ensure you continue to earn. So if you incapacitate, the state might just decide your fate. But if you ask me granny what they mean by it, she will just tell you, say, I want one cocoa full basket. Now that make much more sense, because capacity no means say it full. It just means say people look on it through different lens. Equity or equality is always a big debate, because some people believe both of them equate. But equity just ask if it treat me right, like how you treat them other one, so me not have to fight. The great icon Bob Marley, him put it together so regularly. Until the basic human rights are equally guaranteed to all, everywhere is war. Just give everyone a fighting chance to make them advance, fulfilling their dreams that sometimes just wash away in the streams. Cause them old time people used to say, dancing up while dance, ungle interference. All in all, this your team not so bad. Them boy out the street would have say it mad. What heap of information JD and have to share. But we all know some people still not care. But we all uno who make time for log on, me guarantee uno this year one. Uno nah go disappointed. Even if uno still in a 90 in a uno bed. Uno will need pen and paper for technical jottings uno can use later. Make sure, one more piece of advice. Make sure uno make use of this year rice. Cause if uno think that education costs too much time, check ignorance, because it's worse than crime. But make me keep my mouth and leave uno know. Me come here to drink milk, me no come here to count cow.
Yes, sir. We have our own comedian on staff. Thank you so much, Principal McNamee. And thank you so much, Leslie, for facilitating the moderation of the first segment. And those speakers, they were so awesome. Thank you so very much. Without any further ado, I want to turn over to Dr. Colin Wolfe, who will be moderating the second panel discussion. Thank you so much. Dr. Wolfe.
Good morning. Thank you, Dr. Gordon. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, friends and colleagues. It is my distinct honor to be given the opportunity to facilitate the next portion of our seminar today. And might I add that the preceding speakers have done so excellently, and I'm sure that those to come will do equally well. There are three members which comprise the panel just now: Dr. Maria Gaberton Swift, Dr. Megan Swaby, and the Reverend Courtney Thomas. I'd like to read a brief bio on each of these panelists, and then they will each be speaking for a few minutes on the subject matter, and then we will be feeding the audience. Keep in mind that the theme of this panel discussion is restorative practices and the impact of such on teaching and on learning. Firstly, I'd like to introduce to you Dr. Marie Gaberton Swift, who is a Director of Equity and Inclusion. She's a veteran educator with 23 years of experience serving children and families in New York. She obtained her PhD in counseling psychology and a master's degree in school counseling from Capella University. In addition, she holds a master's in secondary education from Brooklyn College, an advanced certificate in school district leadership from Niagara University, and a bachelor's degree from Marymount College in Tarrytown. Dr. Gaviton is a former classroom teacher, practicing school counselor, a curriculum writer, and counselor at Mercy College School of Social and Behavioral Sciences. Moreover, she's the founder and CEO of Collegiate Beginnings Educational Consultant. In addition, the Director of Equity and Inclusion for the Mount Vernon School District. Next, our next panelist is Dr. Megan Swaby, who is a clinical psychologist and lecturer in the Department of Behavioral Sciences at the Michael College University, my alma mater. She is trained in restorative practices and often facilitates behavior management workshops with various schools across the island. Her primary research interest is in childhood depression and trauma. Last but certainly not least is the very Reverend Mr. Courtney Thomas, who is a lecturer at the Michael University College since 2016, with approximately 30 years of experience as a classroom teacher and guidance counselor. In addition, he's a marriage officer with over 20 years of experience as a pastor within the Church of the Firstborn of Jamaica. He's in the process of completing the practicum as a restorative justice facilitator. He has a Master's of Arts degree in pastoral psychology and counseling, which he earned at St. Joseph College in Canada, a Bachelor's of Arts degree in general studies with an emphasis on guidance and counseling, which he earned at the Jamaica Theological Seminary, and diplomas in career counseling and teaching, along with other professional certificates. So we can see that these panelists are also highly qualified and very, very steeped in the information relative to their individual discipline. I would like now, in the order in which I have introduced these distinguished panelists, for them now to begin to give an overview on the subject for which they have prepared. Starting with Dr. Gaviton.
Good morning, all. As always, it is a wonderful honor to present to such distinguished educators. So I like to always talk about restorative practice in three ways. The first way, the first way I like to represent restorative practice, I want to make sure you guys could see my screen.
Yes, we're seeing the screen.
Are you seeing my PowerPoint?
Yes.
Yes.
Not anymore.
Okay. Okay. So I like, when I speak on restorative practice, one of the things I like to tell people, the first thing is, I like to do it in terms of what it is and what it's not. And the reason I do that is because I think people need to have a key understanding of what it is. Restorative practice, first of all, is a framework for building community, right? As Caribbean people, we are big on family. We are big on what's important to us, which is our family, our children. Think of restorative practice as that. It's an authentic way of addressing behavior. However, you're going to have a dialogue that's going to come from understanding. It's not like I do something wrong, I'm punished. It's different. It focuses on separating the deed from the doer. That's the first thing. It's also about developing a good relationship to restore balance in the community. So that is what restorative practice is. Next, I always like to say restorative practice is to view the misbehavior as an opportunity for learning. You know, my mother used to say, every mistake you make is an opportunity to learn something new. It focuses on restoring relationship. If I wrong you, I want the opportunity to make it up. I want the opportunity for us to rebuild our relationship. Restorative practice encourages authentic accountability. The doer must accept accountability for all misbehaving. Restorative practice allows for successful reintegration in the classroom, outside of the classroom. So my example, I as a student, I talk back to the teacher. We talk it out. We are now, there's a break in our relationship. We need to now restore that relationship in order for positive learning to happen. Restorative practice, the nature of it is not the outcome, but the response, the restorative part. How do we get back to the point we were before? Next, I always say when we think of restorative practice, we need to talk about what it is not. It is not merely about discipline, even though it will help manage classroom discipline, but it's not about that. It's also not about a pass for the misbehavior. We're going to deal with that, the kids who misbehave. It's not a pass. It's a way for us to rebuild the relationship. Next, what is restorative practice? What is it about? It's a means to actively engage students and allow them to take responsibility for their action and their surroundings. The way we do things, you do something, get out of my classroom. No, that's not how we deal with restorative practice. It's really engaging the student so the student understand what they did. So you, the teacher, could understand why the student do it and help the student take responsibility for their behavior in the classroom. Restorative practice is also about reducing the discipline gap. What do I mean? Well, there's a large group of students, whether it's female or male. Sometimes you might be like, this girl is bullish. I want her out of my class. She's aggressive. Automatically, no matter what the student does, we kick them out because of gender. You know, that boy is trouble from the day I saw him. You hear teachers speak that way. As a result, when a child does something, there's a gap. They are disciplined disproportionately because we have this misconception about children. And restorative practice help us deal with that discipline gap. And in America, we all know about this. We talk about it all the time. This school to prison pipeline. You know, the idea that our school, their discipline is leading our children straight to the prison house, right? I like to tell people all the time, there's money to be made from prison. Schools contribute to that. Restorative practice will help reduce this prison pipeline. So if you look at my infographic, 40% of children who are expelled from school end up in prison. 70% of students who are arrested in school end up in prison. Black students are 3.5 times more likely to be suspended than white students in the United States. And I know in the island, we like to mimic what we see in America, but I'm hoping this will shed a light of what we are doing to our children. Black and Latino students are twice likely not to graduate high school when they are suspended from school. 68% of all male and state and federal prisoners do not have a high school diploma. This is what happened when we discipline our students and kick them out of school. If I'm not in school, I like to say I cannot learn. If I am not learning, I become a burden to society that leads to the prison house. So restorative practice is the key to make it end. So you might say, this sounds beautiful. How does it work? The work of restorative practice is hard and it doesn't happen overnight. However, the first key is the way you ask students questions. One, you give students the opportunity to share their version of what happened. A lot of time when a student misbehaves, a lot of time kids feel, nobody listened to my side of the story. Restorative practice allows children to tell us what they did and why they did it, right? And the way we ask that question is different. Instead of saying, why did you do that, Marie? We say, Marie, could you please tell me what happened today in class? What do you think? What were you thinking at the time that you punched Johnny, right? What would have brought you, what have you thought about since doing this? What have been an effect of your behavior? Now, Johnny punched you, you had a fight. So you have the student think about what happened, why it happened, and you listen. What do you think we need to do now to restore balance in our classroom after this fight? Right? Asking questions this way will help restore the relationship. Also, the work of restorative justice requires that we practice not just in the classroom, but also in our life. Listen, that's the first key to restorative practice. When we say something, I'm going to mirror that emotion. If the student is angry, the student wants to see that you understand that they are angry, right? Second is to demonstrate active listening. Marie, what I'm hearing you say, Johnny pushed you in front of your friends, so you were embarrassed. The student actually hear you reflecting their feelings. Third, it's being present and validating feelings. I understand you're angry. This is not the time for the teacher to say, you know what, Marie is always disruptive, Marie is not listening, Marie doesn't have her homework. That's not the time. The time is for you to help the student hear their feelings back as you actively listen. A big part is validating students' feelings. I understand you were angry and embarrassed when Johnny pushed you, but what else could you have done instead? I can imagine you were embarrassed. I know I cannot, be in that position. And I thank you for sharing how you felt at the time. But how could you have handled this behavior? Okay. What restorative justice look like in the classroom is really about affirmative communication. Teachers, we have to use our I message, right? Marie, I did not like the way you behave. I am very disappointed in you. The I message is very powerful for students. Think about it. Our students spend so much time with us. We become locals parentis. We are that parent that's not there for them all day. So when we use I message with students, it is a very powerful tool. Also, I felt when you punched Johnny, you were very disrespectful. Okay. I felt there was another way we could have handled that. The next part of restorative practice in the classroom is to be genuine. Kids know when you're faking that you care. Restorative practice is really about engagement. It's about building that community, right? So when I think of the word, think of it this way. Research shows that positive supporting relationship in students help take away those adverse experiences. So if Marie never had a caring adult that validates them, you are doing that for the student. Having a stable, caring teacher in the school is linked to school performance. Even if you have one adult, I like to say my one person in school I could turn to that will buffer all these adversities will help students. Finally, when restorative justice is done correctly in the classroom, it impacts learning and enhance learning. Remember, if I'm not engaged, I don't care about math, algebra. I don't care about the Pythagorean theory. But if I have a relationship with Dr. Collins, and I know Dr. Collins is listening to me, I'm going to give it my best. It's about building relationships and connecting with students. And as a result, it enhances academic performance. You're on mute, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Gabardine Swift. You did remarkably well. Not evaluating you, I'm just saying that your comments were very research-based and very appropriate to the time and circumstances in which we now live within the schoolhouses. I'd like to now call on Dr. Megan Swaby to offer her comments.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And please, good morning, colleagues, or good afternoon if you're outside of Jamaica. Please permit me to adopt the protocols that were established earlier. If it is one thing we know about Jamaicans is that we love stories. and we love things that are symbolic. So to add my 2 cents worth to this discussion about restorative practices and the school system, permit me to do a little activity with you. And I hope you're all seeing my paper. It says money, 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 money. And I'm asking you to pretend that what I have in my hand now is not a paper, but it is a lot of money. And I came to you and I am offering it to you. I am sure living in these harsh economic times, everyone would say, yes, money, money, give me, thank you, thank you. But then if I said to you, you know what, I'm going to give you all of this money. But before I give it to you, I want to do 2 things. And I take all of that money and I crush it as though I am crushing my paper. And then I said to you, would you still want my money? I am sure that you would say yes. And I said, even though it is crushed, you would still want it? Again, I am sure that you would say yes. If I went a little further and I said, okay, I throw it on the ground and I step all over it and I get some more persons with dirty shoes to step up on all of this money. And then I come back and I say, do you still want my money? And of course, again, I'm willing to bet that you would say yes. And if I went a little further and asked you, now, why do you want this money? Even though I have crushed it, I have stepped on it, why would you still want my money? And Mr. Thomas, Courtney Thomas, let's pretend, let's be the voice of everyone. Why would you still want my money?
Because the dirt has not affected the value.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And I'm sure that the responses that I would get from most persons would be something similar to what Mr. Thomas has said. Now, why am I using this story analogy to begin my discussion or my 2 cents worth to restorative practices? Because at the root of restorative practices is the whole issue of being able to separate WORTH from someone's WORK, separating worth from work. Or put another way, helping to establish in your classrooms that a student's do is different from his or her who. So your do is different from your who, or your worth is different from your work. We are all valuable human beings, and we're valuable because God breathed his very breath into us and created us in his likeness and in his image. So nothing can take away that. We are valuable. But the things that we do sometimes may meet with the disapproval of adults. What is it that this has to do with restorative practices? Everything. Restorative practices, as was ably explained earlier, has to do with us helping students to, one, being able to communicate effectively. We want students to be able to express how they are feeling when something happens to them. Secondly, we want to teach students how to take responsibility for their actions. And the only way we can effectively do that is if we first have a relationship with our students. I once read something from Positive Parenting that I have just adopted, and it says, to correct a behavior, we must first connect with the persons whom we want to correct the behavior in. To correct, we must first connect. And that's the essence of it. What types of relationships do we have with our students? How do we create relationships with our students so that our students can know that we value them, that we place a lot of emphasis on their worth as human beings, and help them to understand that worth and work are 2 different things. Can I suggest that for this to happen in our school system, there has to be a new way of thinking? We have to move away from the notion that the teacher is the reservoir of all knowledge, that the teacher has all of this content, and we must just pass down content to our students. And we have to begin to conceptualize education in a new way. We have to begin to place emphasis on the soft skills. We have to begin to teach our students, how do I create a community of care? How do I forgive? How do we solve conflicts? How do we express our feelings? Traditionally in Jamaica, and I know we have heard many stories, and even now it is still happening, children are not encouraged to say how they feel about something, because many times it is felt that they are being disrespectful to adults, and that is so far from the truth. We all have emotions, which means that we all feel. And it is important that we learn how to express feelings, because something I have learned is that feelings that are buried alive remain alive. And so when it comes on to adopting restorative practices within our classroom, we have to encourage that new way of thinking with the teachers as well as the staff. We have to encourage children to be able to express themselves, create that supportive environment where children can express themselves. So instead of saying to a child, you are bad or you're being bad, no, we say, Johnny, I feel disappointed that you shouted at Mary today in class. So we're separating that. Instead of saying to a student, I see that you're a gang leader and you're always having students follow you and disrupt the class. How about saying, Johnny, I recognize that you have great leadership potential. Let's talk about how you can use that leadership skills that you seem to have naturally in a positive way to help the class to be better for both you, the other students, and the teacher as well. So restorative practices encourages communication skills. They encourage providing a supportive environment. We talk a lot about LOL, that's a common thing now in our text language, but I want to suggest that in our schools, what needs to become common is what I refer to as COL, care out loud. Not only saying that I care, but how do I demonstrate this in everyday life? And I suggest to you that the answer is in restorative practices. And finally, as I wrap up this little section, I want to remind us that beneath every behavior is a feeling. Beneath every feeling is a thought. As Jamaicans, I said it already, we were never taught how to express our feelings. And many times when you listen to people talking, they talk about thoughts instead of feelings. So you say, tell me about the situation. You know, I feel that it could have gone another way. That is not a feeling, that is a thought. I feel that if we paint the house in purple, it will look better. That is not a feeling, that is a thought. Feelings have to do with emotions, and at the heart of restorative practices, affective statements, affective behavior is helping our persons, our people, our students to understand the difference between thoughts and feelings, because there's a tripartite relationship that exists. My thoughts determines how I feel, and how I feel will determine how I behave. So in trying to correct the behavior, we have to go all the way back to helping persons to be able to identify their thoughts. And I rest for now until we have a chance to answer questions. Thank you.
Brilliant, brilliant indeed. Thank you very much, Dr. Swaby. Both speakers so far have highlighted the direct correlation in the classroom between the affective domain, which I learned about at MICO, by the way, and the cognitive domain. And of course, both of you have so far given the responsibility to the teacher to shift that paradigm and to make sure that the traditional way of looking at students' behavior and responding to students' behavior take on a more gentle and milder approach. I can't wait to hear from my good friend, Reverend Thomas. So no, sir, it's your turn. You're muted, sir. Can you unmute yourself?
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Wolf. Good morning to everyone. I'd love to borrow this thought and share it. Restorative practice is grounded in the understanding that relationships are at the core of what it means to be human. And we cannot exist outside of relationship. So naturally, the healthier the relationship, the stronger we are, both individually and as a community. I really value that. I want to add to what Dr. Gabaton Smith said and Dr. Swaby by making this point that restorative practices aligns with biblical principles of our Judeo-Christian faith. And I think it's a very significant point to make, considering that certainly within our Jamaican context, many of our schools are we call them church schools, and the Christian value system still is very pivotal at in how we operate school here, and we do base our education or morals particularly around Christian principles. And so the sense that there's an alignment with restorative practices is an important thing, which in fact does mean that the restorative practices are not really new, because for a long time many of the practices have been in operation in terms of how teachers and others would display them. But what is appreciable, what we can certainly appreciate, is the fact that the restorative practices is nicely packaged, and therefore it becomes something that can be readily, with the skills that are involved, with the tools that are involved, readily applied, readily learned, readily used, and become and establish, if I may say, a culture in terms of how not just an individual may think and operate, but also how a school community may think and operate. And so that's important. And I think, if I may go on to say that justice in the Bible is really restorative, and so so restorative practices in essence does have a significant alignment and validation, and therefore for those who are within the Jamaican school context, where Christianity is readily a feature of the value system, it is okay. It is okay, and it becomes acceptable to engage in the use of restorative practices. I want to add to that. I think it is creditworthy to the Ministry of Justice that has, since I think about certainly from my observation from 2016, has really made gallant effort in terms of the communicating the principles and the practices. I know they probably might have started about 2008, but my observations have been since about 2016 or somewhere thereabout. But the efforts to teach the principles and to communicate that across the schools, I've seen where that is happening, and I've seen where that is being used by the practitioners within the school system, and the comments are favorable. And I do agree with what Dr. Gabaton Smith has laid out with respect to what the restorative practices bring to the fore. And she was not exhaustive in what she said, but certainly it has been, and it does indicate that there's a whole lot of value to benefit from
the use of restorative practices. I'll pause there for the time being.
Thank you very much, Reverend Thomas, for those interesting research-based comments that you've shared with us today. All three of you have really enlightened us with research, and one of the common threads that I have noticed that runs through all three presentations is the emphasis on the humanity of the learner, the humanity of the child, and to sort of diminish the inclination that traditionally we hold on that draconian approach at disciplined children who we consider to be recalcitrant. Now we're going to shift gears a bit, and we're going to be taking comments or questions from the audience. And someone is ably designated to do that for us, Mr. Franklin Bennett. I'm going to call upon you, my brother, to let us have the questions that might have already arisen from the audience or comments, so we can enrich the discussion even further with those.
Thank you, Doc. I'm operating on all the protocols observed since morning, and we are so happy with the many persons who have logged in. I've been monitoring Facebook and YouTube, and so far the comments coming in are really congratulating the efforts, making commendations on the presentations from our keynote speaker rather, Dean Salmon, and all the other presenters with respect to best practices, if they do matter. And now we are on to restorative justice. Now, the question are not really coming, but if I'm to coin some from the comments, I will start with this one. Most time when persons hear of restorative justice, and especially if you're living in Jamaica, you think about South Camp Road, where there's this conflict resolution entity. And if we are not careful, educators may seem divorced from this context. How can we reassure them that to be endowed with subject matter knowledge is just as critical as being competent in facilitating wholesome relationship building through restorative justice? So that's a question I'm asking, and any of the persons can answer.
Very good question. Thank you, Mr. Benjamin. Mr. Bennett, sorry.
So the first thing I think of, restorative practices is nothing like conflict resolution. There are essence of conflict resolution in it. However, at forefront is the idea that as educators, we are aware that our children go through all these adverse childhood traumas and are going through so many things. And the key is to build relationship with our student in order for them to restore whatever relationship break that they created in the classroom. It is a way of managing the classroom. However, that is not the goal. The goal is to help students understand they did something wrong, why they did something wrong, validating the things they did, and then helping them move on. But not just move on with a past, but move on after they take accountability. Restorative practice will not work in the classroom if you don't help students take accountability, because if they don't, it will be perpetual over and over again, which is very different from conflict resolution. Conflict resolution is we have an issue, we come up with a solution, that's it. Restorative practice has that key piece. Because I have a relationship with you, I understand why you behaved the way you did. However, there's a break in that relationship. I expect you to do something to restore it. The example I like to use, two students fight in a classroom. At the end, as a teacher, without me telling the student, that student is going to apologize to the entire class. Not just in the surface, but true apology in order for classroom learning to continue and for the relationship to be mended for the whole class.
Very good.
Dr. Wolf, I think that many of the situations that end up on the South Camp Road facility are there because of impasse, the persons who really cannot come to agreement, and or they perceive their position in such a way that they cannot agree, they cannot give, and they cannot forgive either. And I think that maybe it is because if restorative practices were for some persons in some situations learned, appreciated, a feature of life, some of those situations probably wouldn't end up there. And so even within the school system presently, I think that you know, when some situations reach extremity where students are expelled, where the school is saying to a student, you can't be a member of this community anymore because it has reached the extreme point, polarization as it were. But it might have been different if the principles of restorative practices were learned, were a feature of that school community, were practiced. Some of those situations probably wouldn't have reached that extreme. And so I think if anything, the restorative justice, restorative practices really does help to reduce the tension, reduce situations going to the extreme positions which regrettably we see them go to sometimes in our society.
I concur. Dr. Swaby, I wonder if you have an opinion on this question.
Yes, I do. I just wanted to add that restorative practices is proactive in nature. And just like what Mr. Thomas was saying, if we get it right from the beginning, then some of these situations that we are finding later on, chances are they would not happen. Sometimes I think we underestimate the capacity of our students to express emotions and to display their affective side. But at the root of restorative practices in the school system, that is where it is to start. I think another challenge that we have is that sometimes teachers may feel that if they allow themselves to be a little vulnerable with their students, it may come across as them looking weak. But certainly in the research that I've read as it relates to restorative practices, when teachers are open to expressing their feelings with students to say, you know what, Johnny, I am disappointed that you did X or Y. Or I was very happy to see how you demonstrated X or Y. It does the opposite. The students respect more, the students connect with them more, and the students begin to see them as humans. One of the things that we have to ensure in the school system is that what we're teaching our students is closely related to real life. Real life. What are the things that they are going to be experiencing in life? And so as we prepare them, we're not only preparing them for school. I remember teaching at a school where the motto was not for school, but for life we learn. So let me say a special hello to all the persons from Garlo, the primary and junior high who may be watching. Not for school, but for life we learn. And that is the essence of it. And we have to begin in creating that community of care, caring out loudly.
Dr. Wolf, would you permit me to raise another concern, which I recognize in the question? The question also suggests what I think is sore in the belly of our education system, which is this: there's a sense in which we probably still have not come to regard the need to emphasize addressing the psychosocial as much as we address the other areas of content within the education system.
Absolutely.
if we're not addressing the heart,
Yeah.
we are not we keep going on and on and on and on, and I think that maybe that is the reason why we get the results we do. I think the heart needs to be addressed. The issues and even the idea of investing in as Mr. Bennett asked a question, that there's a need for investment in when we recognize that things are important and would make a difference, we still sometimes pay more lip service to it than real tangible investment with the resources, with time, with the monetary resources to ensure that the students get it right. We carry on school in the same way over and over, and we are wondering why is it that the students come out the way they do. We need to spend time and invest in the issues of the heart.
Yes. I could not have said it better. I think the over secularization of society is resulting in some of these issues that we're facing with. That is so well said, Rev. And
all right. I'm getting some follow-ups now.
Good.
And I'm going to ask the participants, if I don't call their name, just pardon me, because I'm trying to go through us very quickly and I'm rolling up and down. Now, a critical stakeholder that is coming in is the stakeholder group that we call parents or guardians. Now, the question is being asked, how can they be involved? That's been asked. And then there's a related one. What steps can be taken to inform and include parents in the restorative practice that is connecting parents to what's happening at or in the school? Who wants to take that one?
I'll go. I'm sorry. So, as a parent, I was a single parent for a long time with a son. And I realized when I started using restorative practice at home, my son's behavior changed, the way he approached me changed, the way he spoke to me changed. So as parents, one of the things you could do, teachers, you could help parents learn the technique to address their children. When my son didn't clean his room, I would yell and scream, say, why didn't you clean your room? Didn't I tell you to clean your room? But when I changed to say, Noah, I am really disappointed that I asked you to do something and you did not do it. Mommy depended on you. I'm very disappointed that you ignore what I asked you to do. His response, even his eye changed. He lowered his head and apologized. The next time, I didn't have to ask. It was already done. So as parents, you could practice the same technique. When he came home and I was not happy with a grade, I would you like to explain to me what you were thinking in the classroom? Why were you fooling around? What was your thought process? And I would actually say, I'm not a boy, so I can understand the energy. I understand, but what we do in school is different than what we do in the schoolyard. It changes your relationship with your child. Even now, he's an adult, he's 21, graduated college, that whole, dialogue happens. It totally changes your relationship with your own child when you start using the restorative practice technique of actively validating your children's feelings, right? Oh, I hear you hate math, but you like to count money. How can you incorporate the two? So parents could be involved, and teachers should help parents to learn these techniques, to build their own relationship with their children, and they will also see it in their academic outcomes.
Okay, thanks. Dr. Swaby, I'm asking you this one. It comes from Simone Michelle da Costa. How do you reconcile the restorative approach with the general punishment approach, which currently exists in the general society, especially in our homes and schools?
Excellent question. And while we acknowledge that change is a gradual process, we also have to acknowledge that we have to start somewhere. And while we may not be able to solve a lot of things that have happened before, but I believe if we, at this point, make a decision to start teaching a different way, start incorporating restorative practices in our school system, a whole school-wide approach to it, which includes the parents, which you spoke about just now, and begin here. We may not be able, as I said before, to change what has gone on before, but education changes everything. The keynote speaker says that. And if we start in our schools now, gradually it will get to the rest of the society. Many of us can remember, is who that? Bev Brown, the maths brain from primary school? Many of us can remember that ad. And we can remember 2 is better than too many. Many of us were probably very young when these ads were on television and radio. But what? Hearing it constantly, it did something to us. And we grew up knowing that the maths brain from primary school, if you make bad choices, what can happen? And we grew up knowing that having the concept of, quote unquote, having out your lot that we heard before is not the way to go, until we eventually had the changes. So education, beginning in the schools with all stakeholders related to the schools. Mr. Thomas spoke about the program that the Ministry of Justice presently has going. These things, invest more in them so that it can become a national approach to helping to change what presently exists.
Very good, very rich dialogue so far. Mr. Bennett, any additional question or?
Yes, I have one for Dr. Marie Gabotan Swift. I hope I pronounced her name correctly.
You did a wonderful job.
Okay, this is a question, and it's coming from Simone again, you know. Simone is asking us, how do we translate what we know about positive effects of restorative practice into actual practice? And I think we have touched a little on it already. So nothing wrong in re-emphasizing.
I say as educators, you need to practice every day. Active listening, validating students, practice in your own home. Once you become very comfortable questioning the restorative way, it becomes second nature. That's why I say restorative practice takes work in the beginning. You become comfortable saying, why, stop saying, why did you do what you did? Can you please share with me what you were thinking, right? It takes time to learn those things. But once you learn those skills, and once you realize, children know when you're not genuine with them. Children know when you're not truly invested in them. But once you build that relationship, imagine the things you will be able to teach your student in the classroom. Me, I like to say I'm not a math person, but my fondest memory is that math teacher that actually explained to me how to actually multiply and divide. And I still remember, the acronyms. That teacher made an impact because that teacher was genuine, right? That teacher helped me understand, hey, I may not like it, but it's important to me to learn connection. And as teachers, we are by nature nurturers. Show that to your student. Remember, our kids just spend all that time home behind a screen without any affection. They need us as teachers to remind them they're part of the greater human society and that their feeling matters.
Very good indeed, thanks.
Okay, I'm coming down now. There are some comments coming in, and I especially like this one from a retired principal, Cecilia Grant Francis. I think I know Cecilia, okay? She's saying that restorative practices must be enforced not only in communities, but first to get it right from the infant school. It should be taught to parents too.
Yes.
And then Alicia Allen is saying that mindset change will do the trick in terms of getting us buying into this way of promoting healthy, wholesome relationship among players in an environment. And we're not going to limit it to the school, because school is just a subset of the other environments from which the students come. Okay? And then now, this question will be my last question, that is our reference. Since he spoke about National Ministry of Justice, a question is being asked on Facebook. How can we get the Ministry of Justice to roll out their program with urgency? I don't know if that's in your scope of your responsibility, but there's nothing
Just
wrong
before you answer the question, just a quick minute, just before you answer the question.
Up an opinion, and I know our able representative from the Ministry of Education will help us with the baton change in terms of transferring the
Just
suggestion.
before you take that question, we just have a quick technical issue we want to work through. So we're going to be in a quick hold. Nobody going anywhere. Just hold on right there for a moment. Let me collaborate with our technical person right here. Don't move anybody. Commercial break. We'll be right back. They're doing some syncing of the technology. We are working with another